For 40 years, my wife, Martha, held a ritual as sacred and predictable as Sunday morning church. Every single Thursday, like the steady hand of a master clock, she'd head to the bank. It was her thing, an immutable part of our week, woven into the fabric of our lives like the oak floors I laid myself in our first home. I never once questioned it, not truly. How could I? I trusted Martha with my life, with my heart, and with every single dime I'd ever scraped together, building bridges that spanned rivers and highways that carved paths across this great state of Georgia. My mind, ever the engineer, rationalized it away. She was saving for our golden years, maybe squirreling away a little extra for the grandkids' college funds, or quietly supporting some small, local charity she held dear. I imagined her, a kindly steward of our modest prosperity, looking out for us all. What a damn fool I was. Last week, when Martha slipped away from me, taken by a cancer that stole her light by inches, the truth found me. And when it didn't just chill my blood, it froze it solid in my veins. The woman I'd slept beside for 4 decades, the woman whose hand I'd held through countless quiet evenings, had a secret life. And the story of that life, neatly inscribed in a little blue notebook, was about to shatter every single thing I thought I knew about my family, about loyalty, and about the quiet, desperate sacrifices we make for love. Before I tell you what was in that book, the truth it laid bare, and how I forced my own son to wish he had never drawn a breath, please take a moment to subscribe. If you've ever had that cold, twisting feeling in your gut, that primal knowing that someone close to you was spinning a web of lies, go ahead and hit that like button. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's a big world out there, but some stories resonate no matter the distance. My name is Thomas Bennett, and I'm 70 years old. I've spent my entire adult life pouring concrete, welding steel, and erecting structures that stand strong against time and the elements. I know foundations. I know how to read the subtle shifts, the faint hairline cracks, the minute stresses that tell you a building is compromised long before the whole house comes crashing down. I've seen it in the ground beneath my feet, in the steel beams soaring skyward, and in the faces of men hiding a bad batch of rebar. But standing there, soaked to the bone in the relentless Georgia rain at Oak Hill Cemetery, I missed the biggest crack of all. The sky wept with a mournful intensity, transforming the red clay of Georgia into a slick, treacherous muck around Martha's gravesite. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and wilting lilies. I stood like a forgotten statue, gripping the handle of my black umbrella so tight my knuckles turned bone white, staring at the polished mahogany casket, imagining Martha nestled inside. My Martha, my heart screamed for release. I wanted to drop to my knees in that red mud, to howl at the indifferent gray sky, to let the raw, primal grief tear through me. But I couldn't. I was numb. It was as if every circuit in my body, every wire connecting me to feeling, had shorted out, leaving me hollow and cold. Right next to me, my son, Jacob, stood. He's 42 now, a man in the prime of his life, or so you'd think. He works in middle management at some logistics firm downtown, the kind of job where you push papers and talk big about synergy but never really build anything tangible. He was putting on quite a show. I'll give him that. He sobbed loudly, his shoulders shaking with what appeared to be uncontrollable grief, constantly dabbing his eyes with a silk handkerchief. To any casual observer, he was the picture of a heartbroken son, a pillar of sorrow. But I built things for a living. I see details others miss. I look for stress points, for the subtle tells that betray structural weakness. And I saw something that didn't fit, something that grated against the raw grief I was trying so hard to process. Every time Jacob lifted that pristine silk handkerchief to his face, his left hand would, almost imperceptibly, adjust his cuff. He'd pull back the sleeve of his black suit jacket, just enough, for just a flash, to expose his wrist. And there it was, a glint of solid gold. It wasn't just any timepiece, it was a Rolex Submariner, solid gold. I know the value of things, not just in dollars and cents, but in the sweat and sacrifice it takes to earn them. That watch, sitting there on his wrist, soaking up the rainwater, was $30,000. Easy. A quick Google search would confirm it. Jacob makes $60,000 a year, and that's before taxes. He's got a mortgage he gripes about constantly, 2 kids in private school that Martha and I often chipped in for, and he drives a leased sedan, always complaining about the payments. Where on God's green earth did he get $30,000 for a watch? I never bought it for him. Martha, a woman who considered a sale on canned peaches a minor victory, certainly didn't have that kind of money. Or so I thought. He caught me looking. For a split second, the performance dropped. The grief vanished from his face, replaced by an expression of hard, cold calculation, like a shark sizing up its prey. He quickly pulled his sleeve down, covering the incriminating gold, and went right back to his loud, shuddering sobs. A cold dread, far deeper and more chilling than the damp weather, began to curdle in my stomach. It was my gut, the same gut that told me when a concrete pour was off, screaming that the foundation of my family was rotten. We left the cemetery and headed back to the house for the reception. I built this place with my own hands 30 years ago. From the solid oak floors I milled myself to the rough-hewn stone fireplace in the living room. It was supposed to be our sanctuary, a testament to a lifetime of honest labor and shared dreams. Now, it was crammed full of people I barely knew, munching on potato salad and tuna casseroles, murmuring empty platitudes and generic "so sorry for your loss" comments. The air was thick with the smell of too many perfumes and the polite, strained awkwardness of obligatory condolence calls. I retreated to my favorite armchair in the corner, a worn leather beast that fit me like a second skin, and simply watched. My daughter, Sarah, a good woman, was in the kitchen, actually doing the work. Bless her heart. She was making fresh coffee, refilling platters, making sure everyone was fed and comfortable. She looked utterly exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed, but she moved with a quiet dignity, serving others even in her own profound grief. Jacob, however, was a different story. He was circling the living room, a predator in a suit, his eyes darting from the old landscape paintings on the walls to the antique side tables, to Martha's collection of porcelain figurines. He wasn't looking at them with sentiment, he was appraising them, like an auctioneer sizing up an estate sale, mentally tagging prices on every cherished item. When the last well-wisher finally shuffled out the door, Jacob didn't come over to offer comfort, to ask how I was holding up, or even to put a hand on my shoulder. No. He walked straight to me, his gait smooth and purposeful, and sat on the ottoman directly in front of my chair. "Dad," he began, his voice far too smooth, too practiced. "We need to talk logistics." I looked at him, bone-weary and soul-sick. "Can we not do this today, Jacob? We just buried your mother. We have to handle the administrative side, Dad," he pressed on, his voice betraying no hint of sorrow. "Look, I know you're grieving, and you're not thinking clearly right now, but I need the key to Mom's home office." "Why?" I asked, my voice raspy, a stranger to my own ears. "I need to look for insurance policies, Dad," he said, leaning in, his tone conspiratorial. "You know, funerals are expensive, and the medical bills from her cancer treatments must be piling up. I want to help you sort through the debt so we can pay the funeral home, take care of everything." I looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time in my 70 years, I didn't see my little boy, the one who used to crawl into my lap after a bad dream. I saw a stranger, a calculating, greedy stranger. Something shifted inside me. The old engineer, the part of me that dealt with corrupt inspectors trying to cut corners and lazy subcontractors trying to milk the clock, took over. I sat up straighter, my spine stiffening. "You don't need to worry about the funeral, Jacob," I said, my voice cold, clipped. "I wrote the check yesterday. It's paid in full." Jacob blinked, clearly surprised. The carefully constructed mask of concern faltered for a moment. "Oh, well, that's good. But the medical bills, Dad, the hospital stay was weeks long. That could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. We might need to liquidate some assets or check her accounts to cover it." I let out a laugh. It was a dry, harsh sound, devoid of humor. "Liquidate assets? Is that what you're calling it, son?" I leaned forward, my gaze piercing. "Jacob, listen to me closely. I paid the hospital bill last week, $512,000. I paid it from my savings. I do not have debt. I have never had debt since 1985. Your mother's medical care was paid for by me, not by insurance. By me. So, you do not need to look for anything. Jacob's face went pale. He hadn't known I had that kind of liquidity, that kind of financial cushion. He thought I was just an old retired builder, puttering around, living off Social Security and a small pension. He didn't know about the careful, long-term investments I'd made in the 90s, diversified and rock solid, a foundation for our future, he stammered, trying desperately to recover. But Dad, there might be other things. Mom might have had personal debts, or maybe she left a will in there. I just want to help you organize. You're wearing a $30,000 watch, Jacob, I said, my voice low, pointing a calloused finger at his wrist. He flinched, instinctively covering it with his other hand. It's a fake, Dad, a knockoff. I got it online for $50, just to look professional for work, you know. I stared at him. I know gold. I know the weight of it, the way it catches the light, the subtle gleam that no cheap imitation can replicate. That was no $50 fake. But I didn't press him. Not yet. Go home, Jacob, I said, my voice firm. Go home to your wife. Leave the organizing to me. He hesitated, his eyes darting to the locked door of Martha's office, which was down the hall. I could practically see the hunger in his eyes, the naked greed. He didn't want to help. He wanted to find something valuable. Fine, Dad, he said, standing up. The picture of a dutiful son, a role he played so poorly. I was just trying to be a good son. Call me if you need anything. He left quickly, almost eager to escape. Sarah, my steady girl, kissed me on the forehead, her touch warm and reassuring, and left soon after, telling me to call her if I needed company. Finally, I was alone. The house was quiet, too quiet. The silence pressed against my ears, a heavy shroud. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the living room in long, unsettling shadows. My mind kept returning to Jacob's desperation, his insistence on getting into that office. Martha was a private woman. Yes, she handled the household bills, kept a small checking account for groceries and her hair appointments, but she was meticulous, frugal. Why would Jacob think there was anything of value in there unless he knew something I didn't? The thought, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of my grief. I stood up, my knees protesting with a series of pops and clicks that echoed in the quiet house. I walked down the hallway to the small room Martha used as an office. It was locked, as it always had been. She used to say she didn't want the grandkids messing up her sewing patterns. I didn't have the key. Jacob had asked for it, which meant he didn't have it either. But I didn't need a key. I built this doorframe. I built this house. I knew its secrets. I went to the garage and retrieved a thin piece of high-tensile wire, the kind I used to secure rebar. It took me about 10 seconds to pop the simple interior lock. I stepped inside. The room enveloped me in her scent, a faint aroma of lavender, her preferred sachet for her linens, mixed with the dusty, comforting smell of old paper. It broke my heart all over again, a fresh wave of grief. Her antique sewing machine, a gift from her mother, sat covered in the corner. Her desk was meticulously neat and tidy, just as she'd left it. I started going through the drawers, my movements slow, reverent, nothing unusual. Utility bills, meticulously organized by month and year. A Christmas card list, updated annually. Coupons clipped from the Sunday paper, sorted by expiration date. Martha was fiercely frugal. She would drive 2 miles out of her way to save 10 cents on a gallon of milk, or spend an hour mending a shirt that most people would toss. That's why the idea of her having secret debts was utterly laughable, an insult to her memory. I checked the small filing cabinet. Nothing. Just old tax returns, sorted neatly, and the house deeds. I sat in her desk chair, feeling foolish. Maybe Jacob was just being nosy. Maybe I was just a paranoid old man, looking for a fight to distract me from the searing pain of loss. I looked around the room one last time, my eyes scanning for any anomaly, any misplaced object. My gaze landed on her old sewing basket, perched on a shelf above the desk. It was a wicker basket, worn smooth from 40 years of use, a familiar sight in our home. Jacob would never look there. To him, that was just old lady stuff, full of thread and thimbles. But I knew Martha hid her secret chocolate stash in there, tucked away from the prying hands of hungry grandkids. I reached up and took the basket down. I opened the lid. Inside, nestled amongst spools of colorful thread, a collection of needles, and her pincushion, beneath a layer of fabric scraps, there was a hard, rectangular object. I pulled it out. It was a ledger, a blue, hardcover accounting book, the kind you'd buy at an office supply store, looking old and worn. The spine was cracked, the color faded, the corners dog-eared with years of handling. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened it to the very first page. The date at the top, written in Martha's neat, looping cursive, was January 14th, 1984. Below it, a single entry, Thursday. First National Bank, withdrawal, $1,000. I frowned. $1,000 in 1984. That was a substantial sum, a lot of money back then. It was more than I made in 2 weeks, back when I was still clawing my way up, building my company. I turned the page. January 21st, 1984. Thursday. First National Bank. Withdrawal. $1,000. I kept turning pages, each one a stark, identical entry. Every single week, every Thursday, for 40 years. My mind, the engineer's mind, started to do the math. 52 weeks a year, times 40 years. That's over $2 million. My hands started to shake, the ledger feeling impossibly heavy. I dropped the book onto the desk with a soft thud. Where did she get that kind of money? Martha was a school teacher before she retired, earning a respectable but by no means lavish salary. She didn't have millions. And even if she did, why was she withdrawing it in cash, every single week, for 4 decades? Then I remembered something. Every Thursday, for as long as I could remember, Martha would announce she was running errands. She'd say she was going to the market, then to the bank to deposit her pension checks, or move money into savings. I never checked. I never asked to see the receipts. I trusted her implicitly. But according to this book, she wasn't depositing. She was withdrawing. $1,000 a week, for 40 years. Where did the money go? I flipped to the very last entry. It was dated last Thursday, just 3 days before she died. She was so weak then, barely able to walk. I had driven her to the strip mall, waited in the car while she, with immense effort, went into the bank next door. She had insisted on going in alone. The entry was shaky, written with a trembling hand, but it was there. Thursday. First National Bank. $1,000. And next to it, for the first time in 40 years, there was a note. A single word, stark and chilling, written in red ink. Done. I stared at that word. Done. What was done? What monumental task or obligation had finally been completed, so close to her last breath? And then I remembered the watch, the solid gold Rolex on Jacob's wrist. The way he covered it up, the way he had so desperately wanted into this very room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was terrified. The next morning, I was going to the First National Bank, and I was going to find out where $2 million of my wife's life had disappeared to. If my suspicions about that Rolex were right, if Jacob was involved in this, there was going to be a war in this family, a reckoning that would make the earth tremble. I closed the blue ledger and tucked it into my pocket. The funeral was over. The investigation had just begun. The next morning, exactly 1 week after Martha's last errand, I pulled my old Ford pickup into the parking lot of the First National Bank. It was a Thursday, just like every entry in the blue notebook. The sun was shining, a crisp, cold light, but the air had a bite to it that went right through my canvas jacket. I sat in the truck for a moment, watching the automatic doors slide open and closed, a silent, rhythmic dance. For 40 years, Martha had walked through those doors, every single week. I tried to picture her, to imagine her face as she entered. Was she nervous, glancing over her shoulder? Or did she walk in with her head held high, with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else in her life? I realized, with a heavy heart, that I didn't know. I didn't know the woman who came to this bank. A stranger, perhaps. I looked down at myself. I was wearing my usual work clothes, faded Carhartt trousers, stained with a little hydraulic fluid from the tractor, and comfortable work boots that had seen better days. I have suits. I have plenty of money to buy expensive clothes, but I'm a builder. I'm comfortable in the clothes that built my life, the clothes that bore the marks of honest labor. I didn't think twice about it until I stepped into the lobby. The bank had changed since I built this branch back in '98. They'd remodeled, gone upscale. It was all glass and polished steel now, cold, impersonal, almost alien. I walked up to the teller line. There was a young woman behind the counter. Her name tag said Jessica. She looked to be about 20 years old, with perfectly manicured nails and an expression of profound boredom. When I stepped up to the window, she looked me up and down. Her eyes lingered on the fraying collar of my jacket and the dirt under my fingernails. I saw the judgment instantly. She saw an old man who probably came in to cash a small Social Security check or complain about a $5 fee. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone polite but dismissive, the kind of voice you use for a child or someone you simply want to get rid of. "I need to see the records for my wife's account," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. I cleared my throat. Her name was Martha Bennett. She passed away last week. The girl didn't even type anything into her computer. She just gave me a tight, practiced smile. "I'm sorry for your loss, sir, but I cannot give out account information to anyone other than the account holder. It's policy, privacy laws." I took a deep breath, fighting the surge of frustration. "I know the policy, miss, but I am her husband. I am the executor of her estate. I have my identification right here." I reached for my wallet, but she stopped me with a raised hand. "Sir, unless your name is on the account or you have a court order present with you right now, I cannot help you. You will have to make an appointment with a personal banker next week." Next week? I didn't have until next week. The blue ledger, tucked into my jacket pocket, felt like it was burning a hole through me. "Listen to me," I said, leaning in, my voice dropping to a low, intense rumble. "I don't need to make a withdrawal. I just need to see the history. She came here every Thursday. Every single Thursday for 40 years. Someone here knows her." Jessica sighed loudly, a dramatic display of her exasperation. "Sir, please lower your voice, or I will have to call security. We have hundreds of customers. We don't track who comes in on Thursdays. Now, if you don't have business to conduct, I need to ask you to step aside." I felt the blood rush to my face. It wasn't embarrassment. It was pure, unadulterated rage. I looked around the lobby, at the cold, polished surfaces, at the ceiling, at the heavy steel vault door in the back. I pointed a calloused finger at the ceiling. "You see those trusses up there, miss? The steel beams that hold this roof over your head? I welded those. And that vault back there? I poured the reinforced concrete casing for it myself. I built this building while you were still in diapers, so do not tell me to step aside. Go get your branch manager. Go get Mrs. Gable. Now." The girl's eyes went wide. She opened her mouth to argue, but something in my face, something in the cold fury in my eyes, must have stopped her. She pressed a button under the counter, a silent alarm, and hurried away towards the back offices. A moment later, the door to the manager's office opened. Mrs. Gable walked out. She was a woman in her 60s, elegant and sharp, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. We had known each other for 20 years, ever since she was a junior teller and I was a young, ambitious contractor. She looked at the young teller, then she looked at me. Her face softened immediately. "Mr. Bennett," she said, walking over with her hand extended. "I heard about Martha. I am so terribly sorry. She ignored my work clothes, the dirt under my fingernails. She shook my hand firmly, her grip strong and sincere. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice calmer now. "I need your help. Your teller here says I need a court order to know what my wife was doing here for 4 decades. Mrs. Gable looked at the young teller, who was now shrinking back against the wall, trying to make herself invisible. "It's all right, Jessica. Mr. Bennett is a legacy client. I will handle this." She led me back to her office. It was quiet in there, a sanctuary from the sterile lobby. The walls were lined with certificates and framed family photos, a testament to a life well lived. She gestured for me to sit in a plush leather chair. She closed the door, creating a private space, and sat behind her desk. She looked tired, I noticed, even older than her years. There was a hesitation in her movements that I hadn't seen before. "Thomas," she said, using my first name, a sign of their long acquaintance. "I figured you would come in eventually. I saw the obituary in the paper. Martha was a wonderful woman." I nodded, swallowing the lump that had formed in my throat. "She was, Mrs. Gable. She was. I found a book, a ledger. Martha kept records. She came here every week, every Thursday. The book says she deposited or moved $1,000 every time." Mrs. Gable's expression became unreadable, a carefully constructed professional mask. She adjusted her reading glasses, a slow, deliberate movement. "I need to know how much is in the account," I said, my voice tight with urgency. "I need to know why she was saving it. Was it for the grandkids? Was it for charity? Jacob thinks she had debts, but I know that isn't true." Mrs. Gable sighed. She turned to her computer and typed for a moment. The soft clicking of the keys was the only sound in the room, amplifying the tension. "Thomas," she said softly, without looking at me. "Martha didn't have a joint account with you here. It was a personal account, a separate money market account she opened in 1984. 1984. The year the ledger started. Okay, I thought, leaning forward, a cold dread beginning to seep into my bones. "So, what's the balance?" Mrs. Gable hesitated. She looked at the screen. Then she looked at me with eyes full of pity. "I hate pity. Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice gentle. "The balance in the account is $14.50. I froze. I stared at her, uncomprehending. I felt like the floor had just dropped out from under my chair, sending me plunging into a bottomless abyss. $14? I repeated, the words barely a whisper. "That's impossible. The book, the ledger, it lists thousands of entries. $1,000 a week for 40 years. That's millions, Mrs. Gable. Where's the money?" Mrs. Gable turned the monitor so I could see it. I squinted at the lines of numbers, a stark digital display of betrayal. She cleared her throat, a soft, nervous sound. "Thomas, you're misunderstanding. Martha wasn't depositing money." I looked at her, confused, my mind struggling to grasp the words. "What do you mean?" "She was withdrawing money," Mrs. Gable said gently, her voice full of a quiet sorrow. "Every Thursday, she had an automatic transfer come in from her teacher's pension and a small annuity she inherited from her parents years ago. And every Thursday, she came to the teller window and withdrew $1,000 in cash." The room started to spin. "Withdrawing? But," I stammered, my voice thick with disbelief. "Where did she take it? If she wasn't putting it here, where was she taking it?" "We assumed she was taking it to you, Thomas," Mrs. Gable said, her eyes now openly sympathetic. "Or maybe using it for household expenses. She always asked for large bills, $100 bills. She would put the envelope in her purse and leave. She never missed a week." I sat back in the chair, feeling like I had been punched square in the gut. The wind knocked out of me. She wasn't saving. She was bleeding. For 40 years, my wife had been draining her own pension, draining her inheritance, taking cash out of this bank and making it disappear. She didn't give it to me. I paid for the house. I paid for the cars. I paid for the groceries. I paid for everything. Her money was supposed to be hers. Her fun money. Her security. "Wait," I said, my mind racing. A fresh, horrifying thought taking root. "Last week, the Thursday before she died, she was so sick, Mrs. Gable. She could barely stand up. I drove her here. I watched her walk in. She came here to withdraw money?" Mrs. Gable nodded slowly, her face etched with sadness. "Yes, she came in. She looked terrible, Thomas. I offered to help her, but she refused. She went to the teller. She withdrew the last $1,000 she had available for the month. She was shaking so bad she dropped the envelope twice." "Why?" I whispered, the word raw. "Why would she do that? She was dying. She knew she was dying. Why did she need $1,000 cash 3 days before she died?" Mrs. Gable took off her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "I don't know, Thomas, but there's something else. That last day, She didn't put the envelope in her purse. What did she do with it? I asked, a new tension coiling in my chest. She walked out the back door, Mrs. Gable said, her voice hushed. Toward the employee parking lot. It's more private back there. We usually don't let customers go out that way. But for Martha, we made an exception because she was struggling to walk. The back door. I thanked Mrs. Gable, my voice hoarse, my legs feeling like jelly. I walked out of that office and through the lobby, a man in a daze. The young teller watched me go, but I didn't even see her. My mind was a hurricane, a maelstrom of shock and burgeoning rage. Martha wasn't saving a fortune. She was paying someone. $1,000 a week, $52,000 a year, over $2 million over the course of our marriage. She had been paying someone in cash for 40 years, and she made sure to make that last payment, even when she was on her deathbed. Who had that kind of hold on my wife? Who could make a dying woman drag herself to a bank to hand over cash? I walked out to my truck. The rain had started again, a soft, relentless drizzle. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel, my mind replaying the conversation. I thought about the blue ledger. I thought about the word written in red ink. Done. Whatever debt she was paying, whatever blackmail she was under, it ended when she died. Or maybe she paid it off just in time. A cold, hard rage began to build inside me, replacing the dull ache of grief, overriding the confusion. Someone had done this to her. Someone had bled her dry. I started the truck. I wasn't going home. I was going to find out who was waiting in that back parking lot. And God help them when I did. I drove home from the bank with the blue ledger, sitting on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. The rain had turned into a steady drizzle that matched the gray gloom inside the cab of my truck. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was racing at 100 miles an hour. I kept seeing that word written in red ink. Done. I kept seeing the balance, $14.50, and I kept seeing the flash of gold on my son's wrist. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to wait. Not another minute. I pulled into the driveway of the house that felt too big and too empty without Martha. I walked inside and went straight to the landline in the kitchen, its familiar weight a comfort in my shaking hand. I called Sarah first. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with the same grief I was carrying. I told her to come over for dinner, that I needed her. Then I called Jacob. He sounded wary, on edge. He immediately asked if I had found the insurance papers yet, his voice tinged with an impatient edge. I told him to just get over here. I lied, telling him I'd picked up a bucket of fried chicken from our favorite local spot, the one Martha loved, and didn't want to eat alone. It was a lie, but I knew he would come. He was sniffing around for money like a bloodhound, and he wouldn't miss a chance to get back inside the house, to search for what he believed was rightfully his. An hour later, we were sitting around the solid oak dining table. I hadn't bothered with the good china, the set Martha had inherited from her grandmother. We were eating off paper plates, just me and my 2 children. The house was silent except for the soft sound of rain tapping against the window pane and the scraping of cheap plastic forks against the paper. Sarah looked utterly exhausted. She was picking at her coleslaw, her eyes red-rimmed, her shoulders slumped with the weight of her loss. She missed her mother. I could see it in every line of her posture. But Jacob was different. He was eating quickly, nervously. His eyes kept darting around the room, scanning the shelves, the cabinets, the hallway that led to Martha's office. He was wearing a casual polo shirt today, but I noticed he still had that watch on. He kept his left hand below the table most of the time, almost unconsciously, as if trying to hide the telltale glint of gold. "So, Dad," Jacob said, wiping a smear of grease from his mouth with a napkin, "did you manage to get into the office? Did you find anything important?" I stopped chewing. I looked at him. He was 42 years old, a grown man, but right now he looked like a teenager trying to hide a bad report card or a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. I put my fork down with a deliberate click. I reached into the pocket of my flannel shirt and pulled out the blue ledger. I didn't say a word. I just tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud, right between the mashed potatoes and the biscuits, a stark, unwelcome presence. The effect was instantaneous. Jacob froze. His fork clattered onto his plate. His face went from flushed with nervous energy to chalk white in the span of a heartbeat. He stared at that blue cover like it was a venomous snake coiled to strike. He knew exactly what it was. I could see the recognition, the terror, in his eyes. "What is that?" Sarah asked, looking confused, her brow furrowed. She reached out to touch it, but I gently put my hand over hers. "Ask your brother," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "He seems to recognize it." Jacob swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I don't know what you're talking about, Dad. It looks like just an old notebook." "Don't lie to me, boy," I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip in the quiet room, devoid of any pretense of grief or weariness. "I went to the bank today, Jacob. I spoke to Mrs. Gable. I know about the withdrawals. Every Thursday, $1,000 for 40 years. $2 million. Gone." Sarah gasped. She looked at me and then at Jacob, her eyes wide with shock. $2 million? Dad, what are you saying? Mom didn't have that kind of money. "She did," I said, never taking my eyes off my son. "She had her pension. She had an inheritance I never touched. And she drained it, every single cent. And I think Jacob knows exactly where it went." Jacob pushed his chair back. The legs screeched against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound in the quiet room. He looked trapped, cornered. Sweat was beading on his forehead. "Okay, look, Dad," he stammered, holding his hands up, a pathetic gesture of surrender. "I didn't want you to know. Mom made me promise. She begged me not to tell you. It was her secret." "What secret?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "She had a problem, Dad," Jacob said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if he were sharing a painful, intimate truth. "A sickness. She was addicted to gambling, online poker, slots. She started back in the 80s, and she couldn't stop. She lost everything, Dad. I tried to help her. I tried to manage it, but she was out of control." I stared at him. The silence stretched out, thin and tight, threatening to snap. "Gambling?" Sarah said, her voice full of disbelief, almost a choked laugh. "Jacob, are you insane? Mom, our mom, the woman who still used a flip phone and thought the government was recording her through her camera?" "Yes," Jacob insisted, gaining a little more confidence now that the lie was out, now that he had a plausible, to him, narrative. "She hid it well. She was ashamed. That's why she went to the bank every week, to pay the debts, to buy prepaid cards so it wouldn't show up on the main statements. She didn't want to disappoint you, Dad. She loved you too much." I sat there, listening to my son assassinate his mother's character, paint a picture of my Martha, my meticulous, frugal Martha, as a degenerate gambler, and I felt a cold, hard knot of certainty form in my gut. He was lying. I looked at Sarah. She was shaking her head vigorously, her disbelief palpable. "That's impossible," Sarah said. "Jacob, Mom didn't even know how to use a smartphone. Remember last Christmas? I tried to teach her how to use FaceTime, and she thought the government was recording her through the camera. She still used a flip phone from 2005. You're telling me she was playing online poker for 40 years? Since the 80s? The internet barely existed then." Jacob flushed red, his composure cracking further. "It wasn't just online, Sarah. There were underground games, local stuff. She had a problem, okay? You didn't know her like I did. She confided in me." I looked down at my hands. They were calloused and scarred from 50 years of hard labor, hands that had built things to last. I remembered Martha sitting at this very table, meticulously clipping coupons from the Sunday paper, a ritual she approached with the solemnity of an ancient rite. I remembered her walking 2 miles to the grocery store in the sweltering summer heat because she said gas was too expensive to waste on a short trip. I remembered her darning my socks, refusing to buy new ones until the old ones were threadbare. Martha didn't gamble. She didn't buy lottery tickets. She didn't even play bingo at the church potluck because she said it was a waste of perfectly good time that could be spent volunteering. My son was lying to my face, and it was a lazy, stupid lie. But I didn't scream. I didn't reach across the table and shake him until his teeth rattled, even though that's exactly what every fiber of my being wanted to do. I needed to be smarter than that. If I cornered him now, he would lawyer up. He would hide the money. He would disappear. I needed to catch him red-handed, with no room for doubt or legal maneuvering. I let my shoulders slump. I let my face crumble into a mask of defeated old age, of a man utterly broken by grief and shocking revelation. I rubbed my eyes. Gambling, I whispered, shaking my head, a pathetic, wavering sound. My Martha. I can't believe it. It's the truth, Dad, Jacob said quickly, seizing the opening, believing he had won, that his flimsy lie had taken root. She was sick, but it's over now. The money's gone. There's nothing we can do. We just have to move on. We have to protect her memory. I sighed, a long, rattling breath that sounded like it came from the depths of my weary soul. I suppose you're right, son. If she spent it, she spent it. I'm tired. I'm so tired. You should rest, Dad, Jacob said, standing up, visibly relieved. The tension was draining out of him. He thought he had won. He thought I was just a senile old bricklayer who would believe anything. We should go. Let you get some sleep. Sarah looked at me, worried, her eyes searching mine for a sign, a clue that this was all wrong. Dad, are you sure? This doesn't make any sense. It's okay, sweetie, I said, patting her hand, forcing a weak smile. Your brother is right. We can't change the past. Go home. Kiss those babies for me. I walked them to the door. Jacob practically ran to his car, eager to escape, to celebrate his perceived victory. He didn't look back. Sarah hugged me tight, a real, heartfelt hug, and promised to check on me tomorrow. I stood in the doorway and watched their taillights disappear down the long, dark road. I waited until the profound silence of the night settled back over the property, wrapping it in a solemn cloak. Then, I straightened my back. The fatigue vanished. The grief, though still a raw wound, was pushed down into a deep, dark place where I could ignore it for a while. I went back to the kitchen and picked up the phone. I didn't dial a financial advisor. I didn't call the police. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years, but knew by heart. It rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. Yeah? Pete, I said, my voice now firm, resolute. It's Tom Bennett. There was a pause. I heard the flick of a lighter and the deep inhale of a cigarette. Tom, I heard about Martha. I'm sorry, man. She was a saint. She was... Pete, I said, my voice catching slightly. Listen, I need a favor. A big one. And I need it tonight. I'm retired, Tom. You know that. My knees are shot, and I drink too much. Pete grumbled, but there was a hint of curiosity in his tone. I know, I said, but this is about family, and it involves that bank branch I built downtown, the First National. I heard him exhale smoke, a long, slow hiss. What do you need? I need the security tapes, I said. Specifically, the rear exterior camera facing the employee parking lot. Every Thursday for the last month, but mostly last week. That's a tall order, Tom. Banks don't just hand that over. I know, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. But you installed the upgraded system for them 3 years ago as a contractor, didn't you? You still have the master override codes. You bragged about it at the poker game. Pete chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. You got a good memory for an old man. Why do you need it? I think someone was robbing my wife. Pete, I said, my voice turning cold, hard as the steel I used to shape. I think someone was bleeding her dry for 40 years. And I think I know who it is. The line was quiet for a moment, Pete processing the gravity of my words. All right, Tom. I'll meet you at my place in 20 minutes. Bring a bottle of whiskey? The good stuff. I hung up the phone. I went to the liquor cabinet and grabbed the bottle of single malt I'd been saving for our 50th anniversary. I wouldn't be needing it for a celebration anymore. I grabbed my keys and the blue ledger. I was done being the grieving widower. Tonight, I was going to be the man who built bridges and tore down obstacles. Jacob thought he could lie to me about gambling. He thought he could tarnish his mother's name to cover his own greed. He was about to learn that you don't steal from a man who knows how to pour concrete over a problem. I walked out into the rain, ready to see exactly what happened in that parking lot. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the metal roof of my truck like 1,000 tiny hammers. I drove to the outskirts of town, where the pavement turned to gravel and the streetlights were few and far between, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. Old Pete lived in a converted shipping container, a metal box that sat on a patch of land behind a defunct salvage yard. To most people, it looked like a pile of junk, an eyesore. But I knew Pete. Inside that metal box was enough computing power to launch a shuttle. I grabbed the bottle of whiskey from the passenger seat and made a run for his door. Pete opened it before I even knocked, as if he'd been watching for me. He looked exactly the same as he did 30 years ago, just a little more wrinkled, his hair a lot grayer, thinned by time and tobacco. He was wearing a stained undershirt and sweatpants, and a cigarette dangled precariously from the corner of his mouth, its cherry glowing in the gloom. The air inside hit me like a physical wall. It smelled of stale tobacco, ozone from the humming servers, and old coffee. It was the smell of secrets, of late nights spent hunched over glowing screens. He didn't say a word. He just nodded at the bottle in my hand and stepped aside. I walked in. The place was a maze of server racks, cooling fans whirring, and wires running along the floor like black snakes. In the center of the organized chaos sat a desk with 3 massive monitors glowing blue in the dim light, casting an eerie glow on Pete's face. I sat down on a folding metal chair. It creaked under my weight, a protest from old metal. Pete cracked the seal on the whiskey, took a long pull straight from the bottle, the liquid gurgling down his throat, and handed it to me. I took a drink. It burned on the way down, a welcome heat spreading through my chest, warming the cold knot in my stomach. "All right, Tom," Pete said, sitting down at his keyboard, his fingers flying across the keys faster than I could follow. "I still have the backdoor admin access from the install." "They never changed the passwords," he scoffed. "Laziness. It's the security guard's best friend and worst enemy." The screens flickered, lines of code scrolled past like a digital waterfall. Then, suddenly, the feed appeared. It was grainy, black and white footage, dated and time-stamped. I recognized the angle immediately. It was the rear exterior camera of the First National Bank, looking down at the employee parking lot and the loading dock. "Let's go back a month," Pete said, typing in a date. "Just to establish a pattern." I leaned forward, squinting at the screen, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. At 10:15 a.m., the back door of the bank opened. My breath caught in my throat. There she was, Martha. Even in the grainy footage, I knew her walk, her slight hesitation, her unmistakable silhouette. She was wearing her winter coat and carrying her old leather purse, the one she'd had for years. She stepped out into the cold, looking left and right nervously, a quick, furtive glance. She wasn't walking to a car to drive home. She was walking toward the far corner of the lot, where the shadows from the adjacent building were long and deep. A moment later, a black sedan pulled into the frame. It moved slowly, deliberately, like a shark cruising in shallow water. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like polished ink. There were no license plates on the front, and the rear plate was obscured by what looked like mud or tape, a deliberate act to hide its identity. The car stopped. Martha walked up to the passenger side. The window rolled down just a crack, barely an inch. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick white envelope. She pushed it through the crack. The window rolled up immediately. The car didn't wait. It didn't idle. It just accelerated, tires kicking up a puff of exhaust, and drove out of the frame. My hands were gripping my knees so hard my arthritis flared, a sharp pain ignored in the face of this unfolding horror. She looked so small, so vulnerable, standing there in the exhaust of that car. "Show me the next week," I said, my voice tight, strained. Pete fast-forwarded. 7 days later, same time, same routine. Martha comes out. The black sedan appears. The envelope is handed over. The car leaves. It was a transaction, cold, efficient, heartless. There was no conversation, no hug, no exchange of pleasantries. This wasn't a family member helping out. This was a shakedown. This was something brutal. "Go to last week, Pete," I whispered, the words barely audible, the Thursday before she died. Pete hesitated, his hand hovering over the mouse. "Tom, are you sure you want to see this? You said she was bad off." "I need to see it, Pete. I need to see who did this to her. I need to know. He clicked the mouse. The timestamp showed last Thursday. The weather was clear but windy, a chill in the air. The back door of the bank opened slowly. It took a long time. Then Martha appeared. I let out a sound that was half sob, half growl, a guttural expression of pure agony. She looked terrible. She had a scarf wrapped around her head, a desperate attempt to hide the hair loss from the chemo. Her coat hung off her frail frame like it was 2 sizes too big. She stumbled as she crossed the threshold and had to lean against the brick wall for support. She stood there, chest heaving, gathering her strength, her body ravaged by the cancer that was consuming her. She shouldn't have been out of bed. She should have been under a warm blanket, me holding her hand. But she was here, in a cold parking lot, to pay a debt she didn't owe. The black sedan appeared. It was the same car, no doubt. It pulled up aggressively, stopping inches from where she was leaning against the wall, a clear show of intimidation. Martha pushed herself off the bricks, her legs shaking. I could see it even on the grainy screen. She reached into her purse. Her movements were slow, painful. She pulled out the envelope. She approached the car. She tapped on the glass, a faint gesture. She was probably asking for help. Maybe she was asking for a moment of kindness, a sliver of mercy. The window rolled down halfway. Martha reached out with the envelope, but her hand was trembling so violently that she dropped it. The white envelope fluttered to the wet pavement. She bent down to pick it up. It was agonizing to watch. She was so frail, I thought she would break. She managed to grab it and straighten up, a monumental effort. She offered it to the window again, and then I saw it. A hand shot out from inside the car. It didn't reach out gently to take the money. It snatched it. It grabbed the envelope and part of Martha's sleeve, pulling her forward. She lost her balance and stumbled, slamming her shoulder against the side mirror of the car. She fell to her knees on the asphalt. The hand didn't come back out to help her. The door didn't open. The driver didn't check if she was okay. The window just rolled up, and the car peeled away, tires spinning, kicking up grit and dirty water all over my dying wife. Martha stayed on her knees for a long time, a pathetic, broken figure in the parking lot. Then, slowly, painfully, she used the wall to pull herself back up. She dusted off her coat and limped away, back toward the front of the bank where I had been waiting in the car, completely oblivious, consumed by my own grief, unknowing of her final torment. I was shaking. I was shaking with a rage so pure and white-hot it felt like I had swallowed molten lead. I wanted to kill the driver. I wanted to tear that car apart with my bare hands. "Freeze it," I barked, my voice raw, broken. "Go back." When the hand came out, "Freeze it right there." Pete tapped a key. The image froze. The hand was blurred in motion. "Clean it up, Pete. Enhance it. I need to see that arm." Pete worked his magic, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. He ran filters, sharpened the contrast, adjusted the lighting. The image resolved. It became clearer. It was a man's arm. He was wearing a dark sleeve, maybe a polo shirt or a sweater, but it was the wrist that drew my eye. There was a glint of metal. "Zoom in," I commanded, my voice barely a whisper. Pete zoomed. The pixels expanded. The blurry shape sharpened into focus. It was a watch, a large gold watch. I knew that watch. I knew every link, every curve. I had stared at it just yesterday, in the rain, at the cemetery. It was a gold Rolex Submariner. I stared at the screen, my mind desperately trying to find any other explanation, any other possibility. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe lots of people have gold Rolexes. But in this town, in that parking lot, collecting money from my wife, it wasn't a coincidence. I looked at the hand again. On the ring finger, there was a signet ring, a heavy gold ring with a black onyx stone, gleaming darkly. My breath hissed out between my teeth. I gave that ring to Jacob when he graduated college. It was my father's ring, a family heirloom. There was no doubt anymore. No room for denial. No space for a father's desperate hope. The man in the car, the man who watched his mother fall to her knees and drove away, the man who had been bleeding her dry for years, was my son, my own flesh and blood, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy I taught to fish, the boy I sat up with when he had fevers. He had watched her die by inches, and he had kept taking her money until her very last breath. Pete looked at me. He saw the recognition in my face. He saw the devastation, the profound, gut-wrenching betrayal. He reached for the whiskey bottle and poured a generous amount into a dirty coffee mug, handing it to me. "You know him, don't you, Tom?" Pete asked quietly, his voice full of an understanding that went beyond words. I took the mug. My hand was steady now. The shaking had stopped. It had been replaced by the cold, hard resolve of a man who has work to do. "Yeah," I said. "I know him." I took a sip of the whiskey. It tasted like ash. "Can you print that?" I asked, pointing at the screen. "Can you print a high-resolution still of that wrist and that watch?" "Consider it done," Pete said, his voice grim. He printed the image. I took the photo and folded it carefully, placing it in my pocket next to the blue ledger. I stood up. I felt heavy, like I was carrying the weight of the whole world on my shoulders. But I also felt strong, imbued with a purpose far beyond grief. "Thanks, Pete," I said. "I owe you one." "You don't owe me nothing, Tom," Pete said, looking at the screen with disgust. "Just whatever you're going to do, make sure it hurts." "It will," I said, my voice cold, devoid of emotion. "It will hurt more than anything he has ever felt." I walked out into the night. The rain had stopped, but the air was freezing, biting at my skin. I got into my truck and started the engine. I wasn't going to confront Jacob yet. Not tonight. He would deny it. He would say he lent the car to a friend. He would say the watch was stolen. He would spin another web of lies, just like he did with the gambling story. No, I needed to know why. The ledger started in 1984. Jacob was 18 then. He had just graduated high school. He was a good kid, or so I thought. He was working part-time, getting ready for college. What happened in 1984? Why did the payments start then? Why did they never stop? I drove home slowly, my mind digging through the sediment of 40 years of memories, searching for the hidden truth. I pulled into my driveway and walked into the silent house, the darkness feeling heavier than usual. I didn't go to the kitchen. I didn't go to the bedroom. I went straight to the basement door. I pulled the chain for the overhead light. A single, naked bulb flickered to life, casting long, spiderweb shadows across the concrete floor. The basement was my archive. It was where I kept the history of Bennett Construction, the company I built from nothing, with sweat and grit and sheer force of will. There were rows of metal shelving units packed with cardboard banker's boxes, each one labeled with a year in black marker. I walked down the aisle, my boots crunching on the dusty floor. I traced the years with my finger. 2000, 1995, 1990. I stopped at the shelf in the far corner. 1984. The box was crushed slightly at the bottom, sitting under the weight of the years that followed. I pulled it down and set it on my old workbench. The cardboard was soft with age, the tape brittle. I used my pocket knife to slit the old packing tape. The smell of old paper and mildew drifted up, a scent that transported me back in time. Inside were invoices, timesheets, and safety reports. I started flipping through them, my heart thudding in my chest. April, May, June, and then I stopped. My hand hovered over a file marked Job Site Incident, June 14th, 1984. I remembered that day with a clarity that still made my blood run cold. It was the darkest day of my professional life. We were building the overpass on I-20, a massive, complicated project. There was an accident, a scaffolding collapse. A young worker, a good kid named Bobby Miller, was paralyzed. It almost bankrupted me. The insurance investigation dragged on for months. They said a safety pin had been removed from the main support. It looked like negligence. Or sabotage. End of chapter 2. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time, staring at the dark windows of the house. The rain had stopped, but the damp cold seemed to have settled into my bones. My mind was stuck on a loop of numbers and dates. 1984. That was the year everything changed. That was the year the ledger began. Jacob would have been 22 years old then, fresh out of his brief, abortive attempt at college. He was wild back then, a young man with too much energy and not enough sense, always looking for a shortcut to the good life, always chafing at the honest work I offered him. I remembered him dropping out of college after just one semester, claiming the professors didn't understand his vision. I remembered him coming to work for me at the construction site, sulking and dragging his feet because he thought manual labor was beneath him, that he was destined for something grander. Why did the money start flowing out of our lives in 1984? And why did it never stop? I got out of the truck and unlocked the front door. The house felt heavy, as if the air pressure had dropped dramatically before a tornado. I didn't go to the kitchen. I didn't go to the bedroom. I went straight to the basement door. I pulled the chain for the overhead light. A single, naked bulb flickered to life, casting long, spiderweb shadows across the concrete floor. The basement was my archive. It was where I kept the history of Bennett Construction, the company I built from nothing, with sweat and grit. There were rows of metal shelving units packed with cardboard banker's boxes. Each one was labeled with a year in black marker, a precise record of my life's work. I walked down the aisle, my boots crunching on the dusty floor. I traced the years with my finger. 2000, 1995, 1990. My pace quickened, propelled by a growing sense of dread and purpose. I stopped at the shelf in the far corner. 1984. The box was crushed slightly at the bottom, sitting under the weight of the years that followed, a silent testament to the passage of time. I pulled it down and set it on my old workbench, a sturdy, scarred surface that had seen countless blueprints and repairs. The cardboard was soft with age, brittle to the touch. I used my pocket knife to slit the old packing tape. The smell of old paper and mildew drifted up, a potent mix that brought back a flood of memories. Inside were invoices, timesheets, and safety reports, meticulously organized. I started flipping through them. April, May, June. My hand froze. I found the file I was looking for. The tab was red. Incident report, June 14th, 1984. I didn't need to read it to remember. I lived that day in my nightmares for years. We were working on the suspension support for the I-20 overpass. It was a massive job, the biggest contract I had ever landed. It was supposed to put Bennett Construction on the map, to cement our reputation. Instead, it almost buried us. I remembered the sound first, the screech of metal shearing, a horrifying shriek that tore through the air. Then the shouts, the cries of warning, and then the sickening crash of the scaffolding coming down, a thunderous roar that echoed in my ears even now. A young man named Bobby Miller was up there. He fell 30 feet. He lived, but he never walked again. The investigation was brutal. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, crawled all over us, scrutinizing every detail, every beam, every bolt. They found that a safety pin had been removed from the primary locking mechanism of the scaffolding. They called it negligence. My insurance premiums skyrocketed. I lost 3 major contracts, and we barely survived the financial fallout. I spent the next 5 years working 18-hour days, 7 days a week, just to keep the lights on, just to keep the company from going under. I always wondered how that pin came out. Those pins are solid steel. They don't just fall out. I closed the file. That was the official story. But if the ledger started in 1984, the very year of that accident, there had to be more. I looked around the basement. In the far corner, under a dusty tarp, was an old cedar chest Martha had brought from her mother's house when we married. She kept things in there she said were too precious to lose, but too painful to look at too often. Old baby clothes, yellowed pictures of relatives who had passed young, a lifetime of quiet memories. I walked over and pulled off the dusty tarp. The cedar smell was faint now, overpowered by the musty basement air. I opened the lid. Inside were carefully folded quilts, each stitched with love, and stacks of photo albums. I dug to the very bottom, my hand brushing against cold, smooth leather. It was her old family Bible, the big one, with the cracked spine and the gold lettering worn off the cover, passed down through generations. Martha read her Bible every night, but she used a small, worn paperback one upstairs, kept on her nightstand. This one she kept hidden. I pulled it out. It was heavy, a thick tome. I sat on a wooden stool and placed the Bible on my knees. I opened it. The pages were thin, like onion skin, delicate and brittle with age. I flipped through them. Genesis, Exodus, Psalms, the familiar stories of faith and struggle. And then I found it, pressed carefully between the pages of the book of Job, a book about suffering and endurance, was an envelope. It wasn't a business envelope. It was plain white, cheap stationery, yellowed with age, and sealed shut with a dried, brittle lick of glue. On the front, in handwriting I didn't recognize, was a single name, Martha. I used my thumb to carefully break the seal. The paper tore with a dry rasp, a sound that seemed to echo in the silent basement. I pulled out a single sheet of lined notebook paper. I unfolded it. The ink was faded, turning a rusty brown, but the message was chillingly legible. It wasn't written in cursive, as most letters would be. It was printed in jagged, angry block letters, deliberately disguised. Mrs. Bennet, I saw what happened at the site. I was there late. I saw your son, Jacob. He was drunk. He was messing around in the cab of the bulldozer. He didn't know what he was doing. He hit the scaffolding support. He knocked the pin out. He laughed and ran away. I saw him do it. I saw him paralyze that man. If you don't want your boy to rot in prison for attempted murder, and if you don't want your husband to lose his company and go bankrupt, you will pay $1,000 a week cash every Thursday. Forever. If you miss a payment, I go to the police. I go to the newspapers. I destroy the Bennett name. Do not tell Thomas. If he knows, I will know. There was no signature. I stared at the letter, the words swimming before my eyes, each one a hammer blow to my heart. Jacob. My son. He caused the accident. My son crippled a man. I closed my eyes and tried to picture 1,984. Jacob was 22. He was partying a lot. He drank too much. He came home late, sometimes stumbling. I remembered him coming home that night, the night of the accident. He was pale, shaking, clammy. He told us he had the flu, a terrible stomach bug. He stayed in his room for 3 days, refusing to come out. I thought he was sick. Martha nursed him, bringing him soup, checking his temperature. But she knew. She must have received this letter days later. She knew. She knew her son was responsible for destroying a man's life and nearly destroying her husband's livelihood. And instead of telling me, instead of making him face the consequences, she protected him. She made a deal with the devil, $1,000 a week for 40 years. She paid the blackmail to save me from bankruptcy, to save Jacob from prison. She took the entire crushing burden onto her own shoulders. She silently drained our future, week by week, dollar by dollar, to keep our world from falling apart. But there was something wrong. I am an engineer. I deal in physics and mechanics. I reread the letter. He hit the scaffolding support. He knocked the pin out. I frowned. I stood up and went back to the workbench. I opened the incident file again. I pulled out the schematics of the scaffolding we used in 1984. I looked at the locking mechanism. It was a gravity lock system, a robust design. The pin was located on the inner side of the vertical standard, facing the concrete pillar. If a bulldozer hit the scaffolding from the outside, it would have bent the frame. It would have crushed the outer legs. It wouldn't have just neatly knocked a single pin out from the inside. To remove that pin, you had to stand there, reach in, pull it, disengage the safety latch, and slide it out manually. A bulldozer didn't do that. A drunk kid in a cab, bumping into the side, didn't do that. Someone lied. The letter said, I saw him hit the scaffolding. But the physics said that was impossible, at least not in the way described to cause that specific failure. Whoever wrote this letter knew Jacob was drunk. They knew he was on site. Maybe Jacob did hit something. Maybe he bumped the frame, causing some minor damage. But he didn't cause the collapse, not the way the letter described. Someone used a coincidence, an unfortunate alignment of events, to frame him. Someone knew Jacob was a screw-up and used that knowledge to extort my wife for 40 years. But who? Who else was there? Who knew the site well enough to know Jacob was there, to know about the accident, but didn't know the mechanics, the engineering details, well enough to lie convincingly to an expert like me. Or maybe they knew I would never see the letter. They knew Martha didn't know anything about scaffolding design or tensile strength. They knew she would just panic and pay. I looked at the handwriting again, jagged, aggressive block letters. I had seen that writing before, not on a threat, but on work orders, on supply requisitions, on safety logs. It looked exactly like Stan Kowalski's writing. Kowalski was my foreman in '84. He was a hard man, a roughneck, a heavy drinker, a man who always felt the world owed him something. He retired 10 years ago. Last I heard, he was rotting away in a state-run nursing home 3 counties over, his health failing. If Jacob was there, Kowalski let him in, or Kowalski saw him. Kowalski was the one who signed the safety logs, claiming everything was secure when he left the site that night. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my shirt pocket, right next to the photo of Jacob's watch. My wife spent 40 years paying for a crime my son might not have even committed, or worse, a crime he was tricked into believing he committed. I turned off the basement light. The single bulb sputtered and died, plunging the archive into darkness. I was going to find Kowalski. Even if I had to dig him up from the grave, I was going to find out who wrote that letter. I sat there in the dusty gloom of my basement, the schematics spread out over my knees, and the truth hit me harder than any slab of concrete ever could. I am an engineer. I speak the language of load-bearing walls and tensile strength, of stress fractures and fatigue. I know how steel behaves under pressure. I looked at the accident report again, then at the blackmail letter. The letter claimed Jacob hit the scaffolding with a bulldozer and knocked the safety pin out. But looking at the blueprints, I knew that was a physical impossibility. The locking mechanism on that specific model of scaffolding was internal, designed to withstand impact from the outside. A bulldozer hitting the outer frame would have bent the legs. It would have crumpled the aluminum, but it would not have neatly disengaged a safety latch that required a human thumb and a distinct upward motion to release. The collapse wasn't caused by an impact. It was caused by structural failure. I remembered the supplier we used back then, a fly-by-night company that went under a year later for selling recycled steel that hadn't been tempered correctly. The metal hadn't been knocked out of place. It had sheared. It had snapped because it was weak, compromised from the start. Jacob didn't cause the accident. I stood up and paced the small space between the shelves, the dust motes dancing in the faint light from the window well. If Jacob didn't cause the accident, then the letter was a lie, a vicious fabrication based on a coincidence. Someone knew Jacob was drunk on site that night, knew about his recklessness, and used the subsequent collapse to frame him. But who? Who would know he was there but get the engineering details wrong? And who would hate us enough, or be greedy enough, to bleed us dry for 40 years? I looked at the handwriting on the letter again. Jagged block letters. I had seen that writing before, not on a threat, but on work orders, on supply requisitions, on old construction forms. It looked exactly like Stan Kowalski's writing. Kowalski was my foreman in '84, a man with a heavy hand and a heavier drinking problem. He was a hard man, always with a chip on his shoulder, always felt the world owed him something. He retired 10 years ago. Last I heard, he was rotting away in a state-run nursing home 3 counties over, fading into obscurity. I didn't wait for the sun to come up. I didn't sleep. I grabbed the incident file, the blackmail letter, and my truck keys. I climbed into my old Ford and pointed it north, toward the Pine Haven Nursing Center. It was a 4-hour drive through the back roads of Georgia. The scenery changed gradually, from the manicured suburbs to endless pine forests, and finally to the run-down industrial towns that time had forgotten, their storefronts boarded up, their factories silent. I drove in silence, the hum of the tires on the asphalt the only sound accompanying my dark thoughts. I thought about Martha. I thought about how terrified she must have been reading that letter, believing her son was a criminal, believing she was the only thing standing between him and prison. She carried that burden alone, day after day, week after week, because she didn't know about sheer strength or metallurgy. She just knew she loved her son. Pine Haven was exactly the kind of place you hope you never end up. It was a low, utilitarian brick building surrounded by a rusty chain-link fence. The grass was overgrown, patchy and yellow, and the paint was peeling off the window frames like old skin. Inside, it smelled of bleach, stale, boiled cabbage, and despair, a potent cocktail that made my stomach churn. I signed in at the front desk. The nurse, a plump woman with kind eyes, didn't even look up from her phone when she pointed me toward the solarium at the end of the hall. I found Kowalski sitting in a wheelchair, parked by a window that looked out onto a brick wall, an utterly featureless view. He looked small, shrunken. The big, burly foreman who used to shout orders across a job site, his voice echoing over the roar of heavy machinery, had shrunk into a withered skeleton wrapped in a stained cardigan. His mouth was open slightly, and he was staring at nothing, his eyes unfocused. "Kowalski?" I said, standing over him, my voice uncertain. He didn't move. I wasn't sure he could even hear me. "Stan," I said louder, leaning closer. "It's Tom Bennett." His eyes flickered. He turned his head slowly, like a rusted gear. The recognition took a moment to swim through the fog of his age and medication. Then his eyes widened, just a fraction, a spark of the old cunning returning. "Bennett," he croaked, his voice sounding like grinding gears, rough and broken. "You got old." "We all did, Stan," I said, pulling a plastic chair over and sitting facing him. I didn't want to waste time. I didn't know how much lucidity he had left. "I need to ask you about 84, Stan. The I-20 job. The collapse." He blinked, a slow, deliberate movement. "That was a long time ago. Bad business. Bad steel." "Yeah," I said. "It was bad steel. But that isn't what you told my wife, is it?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the yellowed letter, careful not to damage the brittle paper. I unfolded it and held it up in front of his face. His eyes, though cloudy, locked onto the jagged handwriting. I saw a spark of something there. It wasn't confusion. It was fear. And behind the fear, for just a flash, there was the glint of the old cunning, the street smarts that had kept him on my payroll for so long. "I didn't write that," he mumbled, looking away, trying to shrink into his chair. "Don't lie to me, Stan," I said, my voice low and hard, infused with the full weight of my 4-decade-long agony. "I know your handwriting. I read your reports for 20 years. You wrote this. You told Martha that Jacob caused the accident. You told her you saw him pull the pin. You squeezed her for $1,000 a week for 40 years. He started to shake his head, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm an old man. Leave me alone." "You robbed us, Stan. You robbed my family. You watched us struggle. You watched me work 18-hour days just to pay off the insurance hikes while you were collecting an envelope of cash every Thursday." He stayed silent, his jaw set stubbornly. He was playing the senile card, trying to slip away. I leaned in close, my face inches from his. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath, the lingering scent of illness. "I have the bank records, Stan. I have the videos. And I have lawyers who are ready to tear this place apart to find where you stashed the money. But I don't care about the money right now. I want the truth. Why did you do it? Why did you do that to Martha?" He laughed then. It was a wet, wheezing sound, like air escaping a punctured tire. "You think I got rich, Bennett? Look at me. Look at this place." He gestured vaguely at the grim room, the institutional bareness. "You think I'm sitting on millions? Then where is it?" I asked, a fresh wave of confusion washing over me. "Where is the money?" He looked at me with eyes that were suddenly clear and sharp, piercing through the fog of his age and medication. The senile act dropped. He looked me up and down, assessing me, just like he used to assess a load of lumber, looking for weaknesses. "I didn't get the money, Tom," he said, his voice, though weak, gaining strength. "I got $500 once for writing the letter." I froze. "What are you talking about?" "I was the foreman," he said, his voice now steady, almost proud of his role in the setup. "I had the keys to the site, but I wasn't the one who came up with the idea. I just wrote what I was told to write." "Told by who?" I demanded, my voice raw, desperate for the final piece of the puzzle. Kowalski smirked. It was a cruel expression that twisted his thin lips, revealing a flash of malice. "By the kid, Tom, by Jacob." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I felt dizzy, as if the very ground beneath me had become unstable. Jacob. He came to me the night of the accident, Kowalski said, his voice gaining a malicious relish as he finally unburdened himself. He was a mess, crying, shaking. He owed money, Tom. Serious money. Gambling debts. Racing debts. He had borrowed from some bad people in Atlanta, loan sharks, and they were going to break his legs. He needed a way out. He knew the accident had happened. He knew you were distracted with the investigation. He came to my trailer. He begged me to help him. He said he saw the perfect opportunity. He asked you to blackmail his own mother? I whispered, the words tasting like bile. He said it was the only way, Kowalski said, nodding slowly. He said you wouldn't give him the money because you were too strict, too careful with your finances. He said his mother was soft. He said she would pay anything to protect him. He told me exactly what to write in the letter, word for word. He told me to say I saw him pull the pin. He knew she wouldn't question it, wouldn't understand the engineering. He gave me $500 to write the letter and mail it. He said he would take care of the rest, said he would collect the money. I sat back, feeling the blood drain from my face, a cold, empty sensation. So he collected the money? I said, the words barely a breath. Every week, Kowalski said. He told her to drop it off at the bank because it looked like errands. He picked it up. He played the courier and the victim at the same time. He used me as the boogeyman, Tom. He told her, Kowalski is asking for more, or Kowalski is threatening to talk. But it was him. It was always him. I stared at the old man. I wanted to call him a liar. I wanted to grab him by his stained cardigan and tell him my son wasn't a monster. But the pieces fit. They fit perfectly. The watch, the naked greed, the desperation to get into the office. Jacob hadn't just stolen from his mother. He had psychologically tortured her. He had made her believe her son was a criminal who caused a tragedy. And then he had forced her to pay for that silence for 40 years, using her profound, unconditional love as a weapon to rob her. He let her die, believing it, carrying that agonizing secret to her grave. Kowalski was watching me. He didn't look sorry. He looked relieved to finally say it, to finally unburden himself after so many years. He's a bad seed, Tom, he said quietly, his voice now weary, the venom gone. I took the 500 because I needed it back then, but I never asked for another dime. I thought he would stop after he paid off his debts, but he never stopped, did he? No, I said, standing up. My legs felt heavy, like lead. No, he never stopped. I turned to leave. I couldn't look at Kowalski anymore. He was complicit, yes. But he was just a tool, the architect of my misery, the architect of my wife's 40 years of silent suffering, was my own flesh and blood. You tell him hello for me, Kowalski called out as I walked to the door. Tell him his old foreman remembers. I didn't answer. I walked out of the nursing home into the bright, blinding sunlight. I felt sick. I walked to the side of the building and threw up in the overgrown grass. My wife, my sweet, gentle Martha. She spent her life protecting a son who was actively holding a knife to her throat. She lived in fear every single day, every single Thursday. She probably looked at Jacob with a mixture of love and terror, wondering if the witness would ever come forward. And all the while, the witness was sitting across the dinner table from her, wearing the clothes she bought him, eating the food she cooked. I wiped my mouth and stood up straight. The sickness passed, replaced by a cold, deadly clarity. Jacob wanted the money. He wanted the house. He wanted everything. Well, he was going to get something, but it wasn't going to be what he expected. I got back in my truck. I took out my phone. I saw a text from Jacob. Hey, Dad, still haven't found those papers. We really need to settle this. I typed a reply, my fingers steady. Come over tonight. Bring Earl. Earl was his lawyer. I found the papers. We need to sign everything over. I hit send. Then I started the engine. It was time to go home. It was time to set the table for the last supper of the Bennett family. I drove away from the nursing home with the taste of bile still in my throat. The sun was setting over the Georgia pines, casting long shadows across the highway that looked like prison bars. I had the truth now. I knew Stan Kowalski was just the pen that wrote the letter, but my son Jacob was the author of the pain, the architect of a nightmare for his own mother because he was too cowardly, too selfish, to face his own debts. As I drove, the raw, white-hot rage began to cool into something harder, something more like tempered steel. I had the ledger, I had the photo of the watch, I had the original blackmail letter, and now I had the testimony of the old foreman. I had enough to bury Jacob. I had enough to send him to prison for extortion and elder abuse, to strip him of everything. But as I pulled onto my street, I noticed a car parked across from my driveway. It wasn't Jacob's sleek leased sedan. It was a nondescript gray Ford, the kind that blends into traffic. A man was sitting in the driver's seat, seemingly engrossed in a newspaper. As soon as my truck pulled in, he folded the paper with a precise, practiced movement and stepped out. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit that bunched at the shoulders. I knew what this was. I spent 40 years in construction, dealing with liens and lawsuits, with paperwork and legal wrangling. I knew a process server when I saw one. "Mr. Thomas Bennett?" he asked, walking up the driveway before I could even get to my front door. "I'm Tom Bennett," I said, standing my ground, my posture firm. He handed me a thick manila envelope. "You have been served, sir. Have a good evening." He turned and walked away, without looking back, a ghost fulfilling his duty. I stood there in the twilight, holding the envelope. My hands were dirty from the nursing home garden where I had been sick. My boots were dusty. I felt every one of my 70 years, the weight of a lifetime pressing down. I tore the envelope open right there in the driveway, the paper ripping with a harsh sound. I didn't need to go inside to know that Jacob had made his move. He knew I was digging. He knew I had gone to the bank. He knew I wouldn't let the flimsy gambling lie stand. He was scared, and a scared animal bites. I pulled out the legal documents. The header hit me like a physical blow. Petition for emergency guardianship and conservatorship. Petitioner, Jacob Bennett. Respondent, Thomas Bennett. I read the summary. My son was asking the court to declare me mentally incompetent. He was claiming that the death of my wife had caused a psychotic break. He claimed I was suffering from paranoid delusions and severe dementia. He claimed I was squandering the family estate on frivolous investigations, and that I was a danger to myself and my financial future. He was asking for immediate control of my assets. He wanted control of my bank accounts, my investments, my property. He wanted to be my legal guardian. If he won, he would have the power to stop me. He could fire the lawyers. He could bury the evidence. He could put me in a home and medicate me until I really did lose my mind, until I became the senile old man he pretended to see. And he would have immediate, unfettered access to the $5 million I had saved over a lifetime of hard, honest work. I walked into my empty house. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat at the kitchen table, illuminated only by the faint glow from the streetlights outside, and read the affidavit Jacob had signed. It was a masterpiece of lies, mixed with just enough twisted truth to be damning. "My father has become erratic since my mother's passing," it read. "He believes there are conspiracies surrounding her death. He has been aggressive towards bank staff. He disappears for hours without telling anyone. He is spending thousands of dollars hiring private investigators to chase phantoms. He believes my mother was leading a double life. I am terrified he is going to lose everything." It was smart. Evil, but smart. He was using my own investigation against me. He was painting my search for the truth as the ravings of a senile old man. The hearing was set for the next morning, an emergency ex-parte hearing. That meant I had less than 12 hours to prepare. I didn't sleep that night. I showered, I shaved, and I put on my best charcoal suit, the one Martha bought me for Sarah's wedding. I polished my shoes until I could see my own tired, resolute reflection in the leather. I wasn't going to walk into that courtroom looking like the confused old man he wanted me to be. The county courthouse was a building I knew well. I had poured the foundation for the annex back in '92. I walked up the steps with my head held high, my posture straight, but inside, my stomach was churning, a tight knot of dread and anticipation. The courtroom was small, intimate. It wasn't a criminal trial, no jury box or spectators. It was family court, quiet, deadly. Jacob was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table. He had brought a lawyer I didn't recognize, a man with slicked back hair and a custom-tailored suit that cost more than my truck. Jacob looked up when I entered. He didn't look smug, he looked concerned. He put on a face of deep, pained worry, a loving son forced to do a terrible thing for his father's own good. I sat alone at the respondent's table. I hadn't had time to call my lawyer, Mr. Henderson. I was on my own. The judge entered. Judge Holloway. He was young, maybe 40, sharp-looking. He didn't know me. He didn't know my reputation, my lifetime of honest work. He just saw an old man sitting alone, and a concerned son with a high-priced lawyer. Jacob took the stand first. His performance was Oscar-worthy. "Your Honor," he said, his voice trembling just the right amount, "I love my dad. He has always been my hero. But since Mom died, he's just not there anymore. He's seeing things. He thinks Mom was a gambler. He thinks she was being blackmailed. He went to the bank and screamed at the tellers because he couldn't remember his own account details. He looked at me with tears in his eyes, a perfectly timed display of filial agony. Yesterday, he disappeared for 6 hours," Jacob continued, his voice heavy with feigned worry. "He drove 4 hours to a nursing home to harass a man who has been senile for years. He thinks this man has secrets about a construction accident from 40 years ago. He is living in the past, Your Honor. He is spending money we don't have on detectives. I just want to make sure he is safe. I want to protect what he built." The judge listened, nodding sympathetically. He looked at me, and I could see the pity in his eyes. It was the same look Mrs. Gable had given me at the bank, the look you give a broken thing that can't be fixed, a thing beyond hope. "Mr. Bennett," the judge said, turning to me, his voice gentle, "you have heard your son's concerns. He alleges that you are exhibiting signs of paranoia and financial irresponsibility. Is it true that you hired a private investigator this week?" I stood up. My knees popped in the quiet room, a small, loud protest. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady, clear. "I hired a professional to look into discrepancies in my late wife's financial records." "And is it true you drove to a nursing home yesterday?" the judge asked. "Yes," I said. "I went to interview a former employee regarding those discrepancies." The judge frowned. He looked at Jacob's lawyer, who was shaking his head subtly, playing his part. "Mr. Bennett," the judge said gently, "your wife passed away 10 days ago. Grief can make the mind do strange things. It can make us look for patterns where there are none. Your son is worried that you are chasing ghosts and spending your retirement savings to do it." I looked at Jacob. He was hiding a smirk behind his hand, a fleeting glimpse of his true nature. He thought he had me. If I started screaming about the blackmail letter, about the Rolex, about the foreman's confession right now, without the physical evidence organized and authenticated, I would sound exactly like a conspiracy theorist. I would sound crazy. I took a deep breath. I needed time. I needed to get into Jacob's house. I needed to find the money he had stolen. I needed hard, irrefutable proof that would stand up in a criminal court, not just my word against his in a guardianship hearing. "Your Honor," I said, my voice low and measured, "I understand how this looks. I admit my behavior has been unorthodox. Losing Martha has been hard." Jacob nodded vigorously, encouraging the judge to see my admission as a sign of weakness, of capitulation. "However," I continued, my voice hardening, gaining strength, "I am not incompetent. I am not senile. I built half the bridges in this county. I can balance a ledger better than anyone in this room." I looked directly at the judge, my eyes clear and focused. "I'm not asking you to dismiss this petition out of hand. I know you have a duty to be cautious, but I am asking for due process. I am asking for a continuance." "A continuance?" the judge asked, surprised. "Give me 3 days," I said. 72 hours. Let me undergo an independent psychological evaluation by a doctor of the court's choosing. Let me produce my financial records to prove that my spending is well within my means. I am worth $5 million, Your Honor. Spending a few hundred on a detective is hardly bankrupting me. The lawyer leaned over and whispered something to Jacob. Jacob looked nervous, agitated. He didn't want me to have time. He wanted the gavel to come down now. "Your Honor," the lawyer stood up, his voice urgent. "We believe there is an immediate risk to the estate. Mr. Bennett is erratic. 3 days could mean thousands of dollars lost. The judge looked at me. He looked at my hands, steady on the table. He looked at my eyes, clear and focused, reflecting not madness but determination. "I am inclined to grant the continuance," the judge said, his voice firm. "We should have a medical professional weigh in before we strip a man of his rights. I will set the hearing for Friday morning at 9 a.m. Jacob looked like he had swallowed a lemon, his face contorted in a silent grimace. "However," the judge added, raising a finger, "to satisfy the petitioner's concerns about the estate, I am issuing a temporary freeze on Mr. Bennett's major assets. Until Friday, you may not withdraw more than $100 from any account, Mr. Bennett. Your credit cards will be suspended. We need to maintain the status quo." I nodded. It was a trap, yes, a temporary inconvenience, but it was a trap I could work with. I didn't need money to do what came next. I needed skills. "Understood, Your Honor," I said. The gavel banged, a sharp, decisive sound. Jacob met me in the aisle as we were leaving. He leaned in close, his fake concern gone, replaced by a venomous whisper. "You're just delaying the inevitable, old man," he hissed, his eyes blazing with hatred. "I'm going to win. And when I do, I'm going to put you in the cheapest home I can find. I will stick you in a room with no windows and let you rot, just like you let Mom rot." I looked at him. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. "You have 3 days, Jacob," I said, my voice low, steady, a promise and a threat. "You better enjoy them, because when Friday comes, you aren't going to be worrying about my estate. You're going to be worrying about your freedom." I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright sunlight. I had 72 hours. My accounts were frozen. I had $100 in my pocket. But I had something Jacob didn't have. I had the keys to the house I built for him 10 years ago, and I knew exactly where he hid his secrets, because I knew he was too lazy to be original. I walked to my truck. It was time to go to work, not as a father, but as a burglar. I sat in my truck, parked down the street from the house I built for my son 10 years ago. It was a McMansion. That's what they call them. Too much stucco, too many columns, an architectural Frankenstein's monster lacking any real character but screaming money. My money. Or rather, Martha's money. It was Friday night. Jacob had left an hour ago. A stretch limousine, gleaming black and absurdly long, had picked him and his wife up. I watched them get in, laughing, holding champagne flutes, already celebrating their perceived victory. They thought they had won. They thought the court freeze was the beginning of the end for the old man. They were going to a fancy steakhouse downtown to toast to their future fortune, to the millions they believed were within their grasp. I waited until the taillights of the limo disappeared around the bend. Then I waited another 20 minutes, just to be sure. The street was quiet, unnervingly so. It was a wealthy neighborhood, the kind where people don't talk to their neighbors, and the hedges are high enough to hide secrets, to shield the inhabitants from the outside world. I reached under the seat of my truck and pulled out my tool belt. I didn't need a lockpick set. I didn't need a crowbar. I am a builder. I know how houses are put together, and I know how to take them apart. Specifically, I knew how this house was put together because I was the general contractor. I knew every nail, every stud, every screw. I had personally overseen its construction. I walked through the side gate. It was locked, but the latch was loose. I knew it was loose because I told Jacob to fix it 3 years ago, and he never did. Lazy. I slipped into the backyard. The pool lights were on, illuminating the turquoise water with an ethereal glow. It looked peaceful. It looked expensive. I walked up to the back door. It was a solid mahogany door, custom-made, with a multi-point locking system, impenetrable to a common thief, with a pry bar. But I wasn't a common thief. I was the installer. When I hung this door, I used heavy-duty brass hinges with decorative finials. They were mounted on the outside because the door swung outward to save space in the mudroom. It was a design choice Jacob insisted on, against my advice. I told him it was a security risk. He told me I was old-fashioned, that no one would be stupid enough to try and break in. I pulled a flathead screwdriver and a hammer from my belt. I positioned the screwdriver under the head of the top hinge pin, one sharp tap with the hammer. The pin popped up an inch. I pulled it out. I did the same for the middle hinge. Then the bottom. I set the brass pins carefully on the doormat. Then I carefully wedged the screwdriver into the gap on the latch side and leveraged the heavy door out of the frame. It swung free with a heavy groan, the sound surprisingly loud in the still night. I caught it before it hit the stucco and leaned it gently against the wall. I was in. No broken glass, no alarms triggered because the sensors were on the frame, not the door itself. The house smelled of expensive cologne and cleaning products, a sterile, manufactured scent. I wiped my boots on the mat. I wasn't going to track mud into my enemy's house. Not yet. I moved quickly. I knew exactly where I was going. Jacob's home office was on the second floor. It was the room with the best view, overlooking the golf course. The room he claimed he needed for his investments. I climbed the stairs. The carpet was thick and plush, swallowing the sound of my footsteps, muffling any creaks from the old house. I reached the office door. It was unlocked. Arrogance. He felt so safe in his castle. He didn't even bother to lock his interior doors. I stepped inside and turned on the desk lamp, a soft circle of light in the dim room. The room was disgusting in its opulence. Leather wall panels, a massive desk that looked like it belonged to a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, shelves lined with leather-bound books that had clearly never been opened, mere decorative props. I went straight to the large oil painting of a hunting scene behind the desk. It was tacky, gaudy. I swung it aside. There it was, a wall safe, electronic keypad, brushed steel. I stared at the number pad. 4 digits. This was the only variable, the one unknown. I didn't know the combination. I took a breath and tried to think like Jacob. He was narcissistic. He was lazy. He wouldn't use a random number, something he'd have to remember. I tried his birthday, April 14th, 0414. The light flashed red, a defiant refusal. I tried his wife's birthday, 1122, red light. I tried his wedding anniversary, red light. I paused. I looked around the room, at the manufactured luxury, the expensive leather, the panoramic view, all of it funded by one person. All of it stolen from one source. Jacob was a man obsessed with his own cleverness. He was a man who took pride in his long con, in his ability to manipulate. I thought about the victim. I thought about Martha, the woman who bled for 40 years to buy this furniture, to pay for this lifestyle. I typed in Martha's birthday, July 4th, 0704. The light turned green. There was a soft, mechanical click, the sound of a lock disengaging. I felt a wave of nausea, a profound disgust. He used his mother's birthday, the woman he was robbing, the woman he drove to an early grave. He used her birth date to lock away the money he stole from her. It was a final, private joke, a twist of the knife that only he knew about, a cruel monument to his depravity. I pulled the handle, and the heavy steel door swung open, revealing the safe's contents. The safe was packed. On the bottom shelf were stacks of cash, thick bundles of $100 bills wrapped in bank bands. I recognized the bands. First National Bank. This was the cash Martha had withdrawn in the last few months. He hadn't even bothered to launder it yet. He just threw it in the safe like pocket change, a trivial sum to him. On the middle shelf, there were passports, 3 of them, and a stack of bank books. I pulled them out, accounts in the Cayman Islands, accounts in Switzerland. I opened one. The balance was staggering, a dizzying array of numbers. There were deposits going back decades, consistent, weekly. He had invested the stolen money. He had grown it. While his mother clipped coupons and worried about gas prices, he was compounding interest on her misery. But it was the top shelf that made my heart stop. There was a stack of papers held together by a brittle rubber band. They looked old, yellowed. I pulled them out and removed the band. The paper on top was yellowed and brittle, a piece of lined notebook paper. On it, in pencil, someone had practiced writing block letters, over and over again. I saw what Jacob did. I saw what Jacob did. I saw him. The handwriting was shaky at first. Then it became jagged and aggressive, firm and confident. It matched the blackmail letter perfectly. Behind that practice sheet was the first draft of the letter itself. It had crossed out lines. He had edited it. He had worked on the wording, honing it, making it as terrifying as possible. If you don't pay, your boy goes to jail. He had written that line 3 times, underlining it heavily. And behind that were dozens of other letters, drafts of threats he had sent over the years. Whenever he needed a new car, a lavish vacation, money for a new investment. Kowalski is asking for more. Mom, the witness is getting restless. Mom, I need another 5,000 or he goes to the cops. He had kept them. He had kept the evidence of his own depravity. Why? Because they were trophies. Because they were proof of how smart he was, how easily he had manipulated the woman who birthed him, the woman who loved him unconditionally. My hand shook as I held the papers. This was it. This wasn't just financial abuse. This was premeditated psychological torture, spanning 4 decades. This was proof that my son was a sociopath. I took everything. I shoved the cash, the foreign bank books, and the letters into the canvas bag I had brought with me. I cleared the safe completely. I left nothing but dust, a hollow echo of greed. I closed the safe door and spun the lock, resetting the combination. I put the painting back, carefully aligning it. I looked around the room one last time. I wanted to smash everything. I wanted to take my hammer to that mahogany desk and turn it into kindling, to shatter the opulent glass, to rip the leather from the walls, to destroy every symbol of his stolen wealth. But I didn't. That would warn him. That would give him a chance to run. I needed him to feel safe for just a little longer. I needed him to walk into the trap I was about to set. I walked back downstairs. The bag was heavy on my shoulder, but it felt like justice, like the crushing weight of undeniable truth. I went to the back door. I lifted it up and fit the hinges back together. I tapped the pins back in with my hammer. Tap, tap, tap. The door swung shut. It latched perfectly, as if it had never been tampered with. I walked out of the yard, through the loose gate, and down the street to my truck. I threw the bag on the passenger seat, next to the blue ledger. I sat there in the dark for a moment, breathing hard. I had broken the law. I had committed burglary. But I didn't feel guilty. I felt like a soldier who had just retrieved ammunition from behind enemy lines. I checked my watch. It was midnight. Jacob was probably ordering dessert right now, laughing about how he had outsmarted his senile old father, toasting to his inheritance. I started the truck. Let him laugh. Let him enjoy his crème brûlée, because tomorrow he was going to receive a phone call that would be the beginning of the end. I drove home with $5 million of evidence sitting next to me. The engineer in me was satisfied. The foundation for his destruction was laid. Now it was time to pour the concrete. I sat at my kitchen table as the sun came up over the tree line on Saturday morning, painting the kitchen in soft, golden light. The canvas bag from the night before was open in front of me. The stacks of cash, the foreign bank books, and the yellowed letters lay spread out like the pieces of a puzzle I had finally, painstakingly solved. I hadn't slept a wink, but I wasn't tired. I felt a strange, vibrating energy, the kind you feel right before you pour a massive concrete foundation, knowing that once the concrete starts flowing, there is no going back. I needed a witness. I couldn't do this alone because Jacob is a liar, and he would spin this somehow, twist it into another false narrative. I needed someone who loved Martha as much as I did to see the rot in the woodwork before I burned the house down. I picked up the phone and called Sarah. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. She answered, her voice thick with sleep, a note of groggy panic in her tone, thinking something had happened to my health. I need you to come over, Sarah, I said, keeping my voice low and steady, belying the storm inside me. Right now. Come alone. Do not tell your brother. Dad, is everything okay? Did you fall? She asked, her concern immediate. I'm fine, I said. Just come. It's about Mom, and it's about the money. She arrived 20 minutes later, her hair messy, wearing sweatpants, still half asleep. When she walked into the kitchen and saw the money and the papers spread out on the oak table, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes went wide, a slow dawning horror filling them. Dad, she whispered, what is this? Did you rob a bank? No, I said calmly. Your brother did. I made her sit down. I poured her a steaming cup of coffee, the aroma filling the tense air. Then I showed her everything. I showed her the blue ledger first, the record of Martha's weekly sacrifice. Then the photo of the watch on Jacob's wrist, the undeniable proof of his presence. Then the hardest part. I made her read the letters, the drafts where Jacob practiced threatening his own mother. I watched her face as she read, the slow realization turning into horror, and then into wrenching sobs. He terrorized her, Sarah sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand, her body shaking. For 40 years, Dad, he made her think he was going to prison. He made her live in fear. He stole her peace, Sarah, I said, my voice heavy with a grief that now had a focus, an enemy. And he stole our future. This money, this is Mom's pension. This is her inheritance. This is every birthday check she never spent. It's all here. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes blazing with a mixture of grief and fury, raw and powerful. I want to kill him, she said, her voice guttural. No, I said. We aren't going to kill him. We are going to destroy him, legally, publicly, and permanently. But I need your help. I need you to be here tonight. I need you to be the backup. We made a plan. Sarah would hide in the walk-in pantry, just off the kitchen. It had a slatted door, so she would be able to see and hear everything without being seen. I went to the garage and retrieved a canister of bear spray I kept for stray dogs, a powerful deterrent. I handed it to her. If he tries to touch me, I said, my gaze steady, if he gets violent when the truth comes out, you come out. Don't hesitate. I'll aim for his eyes, she said, gripping the canister tightly, her own resolve hardening. And I believed her. Once Sarah was hidden, I set the stage. I wanted the atmosphere to be perfect, to press in on Jacob, to leave him nowhere to hide. I closed the blinds, blocking out the daylight. I turned off all the lights in the house, except for the dim chandelier directly over the dining table. I wanted the room to feel oppressive, small. I wanted it to feel like a confession booth, a place of inescapable judgment. Then I picked up the phone to make the call. This was the most important performance of my life. I took a deep breath and let my shoulders slump forward, creating the illusion of a man defeated. I let my voice drop an octave, adding a tremor that wasn't there naturally. I channeled every ounce of grief and exhaustion I had felt over the last 6 months and wrapped it around my words. I dialed Jacob. Hello? He answered on the first ring, his voice chipper, full of an undisguised eagerness, probably already awake and planning how to spend my money. Jacob, I said, letting a pathetic wobble enter my voice. It's Dad. Dad! What is it? It's Saturday morning. A hint of annoyance, but quickly masked by feigned concern. I can't do this anymore, son, I said, exhaling loudly into the receiver, like a man who has given up the ghost. I didn't sleep last night. The court hearing, the lawyers, the fighting. It's too much. I'm an old man, Jacob. I'm tired. There was a pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, hear him smiling, savoring his victory. I tried to tell you, Dad, he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. You aren't well. This stress is bad for your heart. You need to let go. You're right, I said, my voice breaking slightly. You were right about everything. I'm confused. I'm chasing ghosts. I just want it to stop. I want to rest. That's all. That's all we want for you too, Dad, he cooed, the excitement leaking through his calm facade. To rest. To be safe. I want to sign the papers, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The guardianship, the asset management, whatever you have, bring it over. I'll sign it all. Just promise me you won't put me in a home. Let me stay in the house. Of course, Dad, he said, the triumph now barely contained. We never wanted to put you in a home. We just wanted to help manage things. I can come over tonight. I'll bring Mr. Sterling, my lawyer, just to notarize everything properly so there are no mistakes. Okay, I said meekly. Tonight, 7 o'clock. Don't be late. I might change my mind if I think about it too long. We'll be there, he promised, his voice practically singing. Rest up, Dad. It's almost over. I hung up the phone. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. It was steady as a rock. It's almost over. All right, I muttered to the empty room. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I took the canvas bag of cash and documents and hid it under the table, concealed by the long tablecloth, ready for its dramatic unveiling. I placed a single, heavy fountain pen in the center of the table. No papers, just the pen, a silent invitation to his betrayal. I sat in my armchair at the head of the table and waited. The hours ticked by slowly, each second stretching into an eternity. Sarah came back around 6 and slipped into the pantry without a word, a silent, determined ally. We were ready. At 6:58, headlights swept across the front window, cutting through the gloom. A car door slammed, then another. I heard voices. I heard laughter, light and careless. They were celebrating. They were walking up my driveway to strip an old man of his dignity and his rights, and they were laughing about it. The doorbell rang, a chime in the quiet house. "It's open," I called out, my voice weak and raspy, perfectly playing the part. The door swung open. Jacob walked in first. He was wearing a sharp navy suit, his hair slicked back, looking like the successful businessman he pretended to be, a predatory smile on his face. Behind him was the lawyer, Mr. Sterling, carrying a thick briefcase, looking bored, detached, and in Jacob's hand, unbelievably, was a bottle of champagne, a high-end Dom Perignon. "Dad!" Jacob boomed, walking into the dim dining room, his voice too loud for the somber setting. "Why is it so dark in here? Saving on electricity?" He chuckled at his own joke, a hollow, grating sound. He walked over to the dimmer switch on the wall and tried to turn up the lights, but I had removed the fuse for that circuit earlier, rendering it useless. The room stayed in shadow, the single chandelier casting long, dancing shadows. "Leave it," I said from the head of the table, my voice a strained whisper. "My eyes hurt." Okay, Jacob said, setting the champagne down on the sideboard with a clink. "Celebratory drink for later, then." He gestured for Mr. Sterling to take a seat. Jacob slid the thick stack of legal documents across the polished mahogany table until they rested right in front of me. The paper made a dry, hissing sound against the wood. It was the only sound in the room. The air was thick and heavy, like the atmosphere just before a thunderstorm breaks. I looked down at the documents. The top page was titled Voluntary Conservatorship Agreement. It was a fancy legal way of saying I was surrendering my life, my freedom, and my dignity to the man sitting across from me, the man who had tormented his own mother for 40 years. "Sign it, Dad," Jacob said, his voice smooth, but I could hear the tremor of barely contained excitement underneath. He was so close to the finish line, he could taste it. "Just sign on the dotted line, and I'll take care of everything. You won't have to worry about a single bill. You can just rest. We'll take care of the house. We'll take care of the accounts. You just need to trust me." I looked at his face. He was smiling, that practiced salesman smile, showing too many teeth. He looked at me with what he thought was pity, but I knew it was contempt, pure and undisguised. He saw a broken old man. He saw a piggy bank he was about to smash open. He didn't see his father. He didn't see the man who taught him how to tie his shoes or how to throw a baseball. He just saw an obstacle that was finally being removed, a nuisance soon to be gone. I picked up the heavy fountain pen he had placed next to the papers. It felt cold and heavy in my hand, a weapon in reverse. I held it over the signature line. My hand hovered there, trembling slightly, not from age or fear, but from the sheer, immense effort of holding back the cold, deadly rage that was boiling inside me. Jacob leaned forward, his eyes locked on the tip of the pen, his breath held in anticipation. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, shifted in his seat, checking his expensive watch, probably calculating his billable hours and thinking about his dinner reservations. I lowered the pen. I let the nib touch the paper. A tiny dot of ink bloomed there, a dark stain. Then I stopped. I looked up and met Jacob's eyes. "You know, son," I said, my voice quiet and raspy, a ghost of its former self. "I spent 40 years building foundations. I know that if you build on a lie, eventually the whole house comes down." Jacob frowned, his eager expression replaced by confusion. "What are you talking about, Dad? Just sign it." I moved my hand, but instead of signing my name, I reached underneath the edge of the table where I had taped a small digital voice recorder earlier that afternoon. I ripped the tape free and placed the small black device on the table, right on top of the legal papers. "What is that?" Jacob asked, his smile faltering, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. I pressed the play button. The room filled with the sound of static, and then a voice, rough and gravelly, cut through the silence, a voice from the past. It was Stan Kowalski. He came to my trailer the night of the accident. The recording played, Kowalski's voice clear, chilling. He was crying. He was shaking. He told me he owed money to bad people, gambling debts. He begged me to help him. He told me exactly what to write in the letter. He told me to say I saw him pull the pin. Jacob went pale. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he had been slapped, leaving him ashen. He stared at the recorder as if it were a bomb, ticking down to his destruction. He said his mother was soft. Kowalski's voice continued, merciless and clear, filling the room with the raw truth. He said she would pay anything to save him from prison. He used me as the boogeyman, but he collected the money every week for 40 years. I let the recording play for another 10 seconds, just long enough for the truth to sink into the marrow of his bones, to fully register the enormity of his betrayal. Then I reached out and pressed stop. The silence that followed was louder than the recording, a suffocating weight. Jacob opened his mouth, but no sound came out, only a dry rasp. He looked at the lawyer, Mr. Sterling. The lawyer was staring at Jacob with a look of absolute horror, his professional demeanor shattering. He was slowly closing his briefcase, his hand trembling. He knew he was sitting next to a criminal. I stood up. I didn't need a cane. I didn't need to hold on to the table for support. I stood up to my full height of 6'2", my spine straight, my shoulders back. I felt strong. I felt like the man who used to carry steel beams on his shoulders, the man who built this county. I looked straight into my son's eyes. "You didn't just steal her money, Jacob," I said, my voice steady and cold, devoid of all fatherly affection. "You stole her life. You stole her peace. For 40 years, she woke up every single morning terrified that her son was going to go to prison. She went to sleep every night praying that the blackmailer wouldn't come forward. But the blackmailer was her own son, wasn't he?" Jacob started to shake his head, a pathetic, desperate denial. "Dad, no, that's not true. That old man is lying. He's senile." "Don't you dare!" I roared, slamming my hand onto the table, the champagne bottle rattling, teetering. "Do not lie to me again. I have the bank records. I have the photos of you in the parking lot. I have the letters you wrote in your own handwriting." I picked up the canvas bag from under the table and dumped it out. The bundles of cash, the foreign bank books, and the yellowed draft letters spilled out over his legal papers, burying his lies under the undeniable weight of the truth. "She died thinking you were a victim," I said, feeling tears sting my eyes, hot and sharp, but not for him. "She died thinking she was protecting you. She used her last breath to drag herself to that bank to save you. She thought you were a sinner who needed redemption. But she was wrong." I leaned across the table until my face was inches from his, my gaze burning into his. "You aren't a sinner, Jacob. You are a devil. You are a parasite who fed on the woman who gave you life. You watched her wither away from cancer, and you didn't feel pity. You just calculated how much more you could squeeze out of her before she was gone." Jacob looked at the pile of evidence. He looked at the cash. He realized the game was over. The shock on his face turned into something ugly, something primal. It turned into pure, desperate rage. He realized he wasn't going to get the $5 million. He realized he was going to lose everything he had stolen. His eyes darted to the stack of letters, the handwritten drafts where he practiced threatening his mother. That was the smoking gun. That was the proof of intent, undeniable, devastating. He lunged. It happened fast. He scrambled across the table, scattering the money, sending the champagne bottle crashing to the floor with a loud crack. He wasn't reaching for me. He was reaching for the letters. He wanted to destroy them. He wanted to eat them if he had to. "Give them to me," he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "They're mine!" He grabbed a handful of the papers, his fingernails tearing at the old yellow sheets. He was frantic, like a trapped animal, but he never got the chance to destroy them. The pantry door behind him burst open with a crash. Sarah stepped out. She had been listening to every word, every horrifying revelation. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were hard, resolute. She held the canister of bear spray in both hands, aimed directly at her brother's face. "Get away from him!" she screamed, her voice guttural, filled with a lifetime of betrayal, of rage for her mother. Jacob froze. He looked over his shoulder, his eyes wide with terror. He saw his little sister, the one he had lied to, the one he had manipulated, standing there, ready to defend our father. "Sarah," he gasped. You were in there." "I heard it all, Jacob," she said, stepping closer, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "I heard every word. I know what you did to Mom." Jacob looked between us, trapped. He was surrounded. He was caught. He looked at the lawyer, but Mr. Sterling had already backed up to the front door, his hand on the knob, ready to bolt, eager to escape the radioactive blast of Jacob's crimes. "You are sick," Sarah spat at him. "You are sick, and you are going to pay." Jacob slowly lowered his hands. The papers fluttered from his grip back onto the table. He slumped back into his chair, defeated. The fight went out of him. He looked small. He looked pathetic. I sat back down. I picked up the blue ledger and placed it on top of the pile of money, a monument to Martha's sacrifice and Jacob's depravity. "It's over, son," I said, my voice now calm, weary. "The bank is closed, and the police are on their way." The silence in the dining room was absolute, broken only by Jacob's ragged breathing, the shallow gasps of a man whose world had just collapsed. He was slumped in the chair, his expensive suit rumpled, his face buried in his hands. Sarah lowered the bear spray, but she didn't step back. She stood guard over the pile of cash and letters like a sentinel, fierce and protective. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, was frozen by the front door, his hand still on the knob, unsure whether to run or stay as a witness. I didn't look at any of them. I looked toward the hallway, leading to the master bedroom. "You can come out now," I said, my voice calm and clear in the quiet room. The bedroom door opened. It wasn't a ghost that walked out. It was Sheriff Miller, a man I had known and respected for 20 years, followed closely by my personal attorney, Mr. Henderson. They had been in there for an hour, sitting in the dark, listening to every word recorded on the audio feed I had set up earlier. Jacob looked up. When he saw the sheriff, his eyes bulged, a mixture of terror and disbelief. He realized then that this wasn't just a family dispute, something he could talk his way out of or settle with a hug and a promise to do better. This was the end of the line. Sheriff Miller walked into the light of the chandelier. He was a big man, a man of quiet authority. He looked at Jacob with pure disgust, his face hardening. "Jacob Bennett," the sheriff said, his hand resting on his belt. "You have the right to remain silent." Jacob scrambled backward, his chair screeching against the floor, a desperate, futile movement. No, wait, Sheriff, this is a misunderstanding. It's a family matter. My dad, he's confused. We were just arguing about money." "It didn't sound like a misunderstanding to me, son," the sheriff said, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt, the glint of metal stark in the dim light. "It sounded like a confession. I heard you admit to blackmail. I heard you admit to extortion. And I heard you threaten your father." Mr. Henderson stepped forward, a thick file in his hand. He looked at Jacob's lawyer, who was now trying to fade into the wallpaper, a pathetic display. "It's worse than that, Mr. Henderson said, his voice dry and professional, utterly devoid of emotion. "We have the bank records from the Cayman Islands, Jacob. We have the pattern of deposits matching the withdrawals from your mother's accounts. That is money laundering and tax evasion. The IRS has already been notified. They are very interested in how a middle manager with a $60,000 salary has offshore accounts worth millions." Jacob looked at Mr. Sterling, his lawyer. "Do something," he pleaded, his voice high-pitched, desperate. "Stop them." Mr. Sterling shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, Jacob. I can't be a party to this." He, too, was shaking. "You lied to me. You told me this was a simple guardianship case. I am recusing myself immediately." He opened the door and walked out, leaving Jacob alone with the devastating consequences of his actions. Jacob looked at me, his face crumpled, a mask of despair. The arrogance was gone. The confidence was gone. All that was left was a scared little boy who got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Only the jar was his mother's life savings. "Dad, please!" He wept, tears streaming down his face. Real tears this time. "Dad, tell them to stop. I'm your son. You can't let them take me to jail. Think about the family. Think about the grandkids." I looked at him. I thought about the family. I thought about Martha walking in the rain to the bank. I thought about her falling to her knees in the parking lot. I thought about the 40 years of fear she lived with because of him. "You stopped being my son the day you wrote that first letter," I said, my voice cold, final. Sheriff Miller stepped forward. "Stand up, Jacob. Turn around." Jacob stood up slowly, shaking like a leaf. The sheriff spun him around and pulled his arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and final. Click, click. They hauled him toward the door. Sarah watched him go, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't look away. She was strong, like her mother. "Wait," I said. The sheriff stopped, holding Jacob by the arm. I walked over to the sideboard where I kept my checkbook. I opened it. I took a pen and wrote out a check. I moved slowly, deliberately. Each stroke a conscious act. I tore it out of the book with a sharp rip. I walked over to Jacob. He looked at me with a glimmer of hope in his wet eyes. Maybe he thought I was writing him a check for bail. Maybe he thought I was giving him money for a lawyer. Maybe he thought I was still the fool he took me for. I tucked the check into the breast pocket of his navy suit, right next to the silk handkerchief he used to fake his tears at the funeral. "What is this?" Jacob whispered, his voice trembling. "It's $14.50, I said. He looked confused. "What?" "That's the balance of your mother's bank account," I said, my voice flat, devoid of mercy. "That is exactly what she had left when she died, because you took everything else, and that is exactly what you are worth to me now." I leaned in close so he could smell the coffee on my breath, so he could see the hard lines of my face, etched with a lifetime of experience and now utter disdain. "Take it," I said. "You can use it to buy cigarettes in prison." Jacob stared at me. Then he started to scream. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of rage, of pure, unadulterated tantrum. "You old bastard," he yelled as the sheriff dragged him out the door. "It was my money. I deserved it. I waited for you to die, but you just wouldn't die." They dragged him out onto the front porch. The flashing blue lights of the cruiser lit up the yard, turning the oak trees into ghostly skeletons. Parked in the driveway behind the cruiser was the limousine Jacob had arrived in. The back door opened, and his wife, Linda, stepped out. She was dressed for a celebration, wearing a cocktail dress, holding a clutch purse, her face alight with expectation. She looked at her husband in handcuffs. She looked at the sheriff. She looked at me, standing in the doorway, a silent, implacable judge. "Jacob!" Linda screamed, running toward him, her voice high-pitched with panic. "What is happening?" "He stole it all, Linda," I called out from the porch, my voice carrying clearly across the night air. The house, the cars, the vacations, it was all stolen from his mother, and now the government is going to take it back. Linda stopped running. She looked at Jacob with horror, not love. She didn't come closer. She backed away, her face crumpling. She knew what this meant. The money train was over. The social status was gone. She looked at him, not with compassion, but with the dawning realization that her life, her carefully constructed illusion of wealth, was ruined. Jacob was still screaming as they shoved him into the back of the police car, kicking and thrashing like a wild animal. He was blaming me. He was blaming Sarah. He was blaming everyone but himself. The sheriff slammed the door, shutting off the noise. A final, emphatic sound. I stood on the porch and watched them drive away, the red taillights fading into the distance. Linda got back into the limo, her movement stiff, and it drove off, leaving a cloud of exhaust in the air. She didn't even look at me. Silence returned to the property. The crickets started chirping again, their familiar song. The wind rustled the leaves in the old oak trees. Sarah walked out and stood next to me. She slipped her hand into mine. Her palm was warm, reassuring. "It's over, Dad," she whispered. I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean, crisp, cold. For the first time in 6 months, the suffocating weight on my chest was gone. "Yeah," I said, squeezing her hand. "It's over." We went back inside. The money was still on the table. The letters were still there, but they didn't have power over us anymore. They were just paper. I looked at the blue ledger, sitting on top of the pile, the record of Martha's suffering. I picked it up. Tomorrow, I would burn it. Tomorrow, I would start the process of selling the house and moving on. But tonight, I was going to sleep. I was going to sleep the sleep of the just. I looked at Sarah. "You hungry?" I asked. "There's still some fried chicken left." She smiled, a watery, sad smile, but it reached her eyes. "Yeah, Dad, I'm hungry." We sat down at the table and ate in the dim light. The house felt different. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt empty, yes, but it was a clean emptiness, a space ready to be filled with something new. I had lost a son, but I had saved my dignity. And somewhere, I hoped Martha was watching. I hoped she saw that she didn't have to protect me anymore. I hoped she saw that the debt was paid in full, not with money, but with justice. $14.50. It wasn't much, but it was the price of freedom, and I had paid it gladly. It took exactly 30 days to dismantle a life that took 40 years to build. The house sold in a week. It turns out that a solid foundation and real oak floors are still worth something in this world, even if the memories inside are tarnished. I walked through the empty rooms one last time yesterday. The echo of my boots on the hardwood no longer sounded lonely. It sounded clean. It sounded like a blank slate. I didn't feel the ghosts of the past reaching out to grab my ankles, dragging me back. I just saw walls that needed painting and a roof that would keep the new young couple dry, starting their own life. I left the keys on the kitchen counter next to a bottle of good local wine for them, a housewarming gift. I hope they fill this place with better memories than I did. I hope they raise children who know the value of truth, who understand that real wealth isn't stolen, but earned. I met Sarah in the driveway. She looked different these days, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The shadow of her brother was gone from her life. Jacob was currently sitting in a county jail cell, denied bail because the judge considered him a flight risk due to his offshore accounts. His wife, Linda, had filed for divorce and taken the kids to her mother's in Florida. The empire of lies he had built had collapsed into dust, just like I said it would. I handed Sarah a thick envelope. Inside were the details of a trust fund I had set up. I took half of the recovered money, the $2 million from Martha's withdrawals and the interest Jacob had compounded, and put it away for her and her children. Their college was paid for. Their first houses were paid for. Sarah cried when she saw the numbers, a fresh wave of tears. She tried to give it back, saying she didn't want anything to do with the tainted money. "It's not tainted, Sarah," I told her, holding her hand. "It's your mother's legacy. It's the only good thing to come out of this mess. Use it to give those kids the life she wanted for them. Use it to teach them that they don't have to lie or steal to be happy, that honesty is the real foundation." She hugged me tighter than she ever has, a strong, meaningful embrace. She asked me where I was going to sleep. She asked me if I wanted to stay in her guest room, to live close. I told her no. I told her I had other plans. I told her I had a promise to keep. I drove my truck to the Oak Hill Cemetery. It was a beautiful day, a stark contrast to the rain and mud of the funeral. The sky was a piercing blue, the kind of blue that hurts your eyes if you stare at it too long, vast and clear. The rain and the mud from the funeral were gone, replaced by vibrant green grass and wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. It was peaceful, a quiet haven. I walked to Martha's grave. The headstone had been installed a few days ago. Martha Bennett, beloved wife and mother. Simple, true. I stood there for a long time, just listening to the wind rustling the leaves in the trees. I thought about the woman I married, the young girl with the bright eyes and an infectious laugh who promised to love me for richer or for poorer. She kept that promise. She loved me enough to sacrifice her own peace of mind. She loved me enough to let a parasite bleed her dry, year after year, just so I wouldn't lose my business, so our son wouldn't face prison. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the blue ledger. The spine was broken. The pages were dog-eared. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a book should feel. It felt like holding a brick of lead, dense with secrets and sorrow. I knelt down on the grass. I took out my Zippo lighter. The metal was cool against my thumb. "You were foolish, Martha," I whispered to the cold stone, my voice cracking. "You were so incredibly foolish. You thought you were protecting me, but you were just feeding a monster. You should have told me. We could have faced it together. I would have torn the world apart for you." I flicked the lighter. The flame danced in the breeze, a small, vibrant spark against the endless blue. "But I love you," I said, my voice catching, a tear tracing a path down my weathered cheek. "I love you more than I can say. And I forgive you. I forgive you for the secrets. I forgive you for the lies. You did what you thought you had to do. You were a mother protecting her cub, even if the cub was a wolf in sheep's clothing." I touched the flame to the corner of the blue cover. The cardboard caught quickly, eagerly. The fire curled the edges, turning the blue to black, consuming the evidence. I watched the flames eat the dates. 1984, 1990, 2010. I watched the numbers disappear. The thousands of withdrawals, the millions of dollars, the record of 40 years of extortion turned into gray ash and floated away on the wind, dissolving into nothingness. "I have cleaned up the mess, Martha," I said, as the last of the book crumbled into dust, ephemeral and weightless. I took out the trash. "Jacob can't hurt us anymore. He can't hurt anyone anymore. You can rest now. You don't have to worry about the police. You don't have to worry about the neighbors, about the truth coming out. It is done." I stood up and brushed the ash from my knees, a final symbolic gesture. I felt light. I felt like gravity had lost its hold on me. "Rest in peace, my love," I said. "I will see you down the road." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. There was nothing there but a stone and a memory, now cleansed. The rest of my life was waiting in the parking lot. Parked next to my old pickup truck was a beast, a 40-foot diesel pusher motorhome. It was brand new, gleaming white with chrome accents, a testament to a dream deferred. It had a king-sized bed, a full kitchen, and a panoramic windshield that wrapped around the front like a pair of aviator sunglasses. Martha and I had talked about getting an RV for 30 years. We were going to drive to the Grand Canyon. We were going to see Yellowstone. We were going to dip our toes in the Pacific Ocean, all the way out in California. But there was always a reason not to go. There was always a bill to pay. There was always a crisis with Jacob. Well, there were no more reasons. I transferred my duffel bag from the truck to the RV. I put my toolbox in the storage bay, ensuring my skills would travel with me. I put a framed photo of Martha on the dashboard, right next to the GPS, so she could be my co-pilot. I climbed into the driver's seat. It sat high above the road, a commanding view. The seat was air-cushioned leather, soft and supportive. I put the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, a deep, powerful rumble that shook the frame. It sounded like freedom. I checked the mirrors. I checked the gauges. Full tank of fuel. Water tank full. Fridge stocked with real food, not just canned beans and bread. I was 70 years old. I had no house. I had no wife. I had one child I was leaving behind, and another I hoped to never see again. I had $5 million in the bank, and a whole country in front of me. I released the parking brake. The huge vehicle lurched forward, eager to move. I pulled out of the cemetery lot and turned onto the highway. The road stretched out toward the horizon, a gray ribbon cutting through the green world, beckoning me onward. I looked in the rearview mirror. I didn't see the old house with its dark corners. I didn't see the bank with its secret back door. I didn't see the son who had betrayed me. I saw the asphalt disappearing behind me. I saw the miles accumulating between me and the past. I shifted gears and pressed the accelerator. For the first time in 40 years, I wasn't building something for someone else. I wasn't fixing someone else's mistakes. I wasn't worrying about payroll or insurance or blackmail. I was just driving. I looked at the photo on the dashboard. Martha was smiling, her eyes bright. "We're going to the ocean, Martha," I said, "just like we promised." I looked at the road ahead, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt truly, irrevocably free. The most valuable lesson I've learned at the age of 70 is not how to make money, but the devastating cost of covering up the truth. My wife spent 40 years protecting our son from the consequences of his actions, but in reality, she had unknowingly nurtured a monster right in our own home. Love without reason saves no one. It only prolongs the tragedy, allowing the poison to fester and grow. The truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a comforting lie. Don't let the name family force you to accept abuse, to become complicit in a lie. Sometimes the bravest act of love is to let your loved ones face responsibility before the law and before their own conscience. If the journey of this old man seeking justice has touched your emotions, please give me a like so I know I'm not alone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to join me on the upcoming roads to freedom. Have you ever discovered a shocking secret about a loved one? Share your story below.